Okay, welcome. This is Denny Grow, and just wanted to extend my warmest welcome and appreciation to you for joining today's Cybersecurity Transformation Summit. I'm president of the ITPA, which is the Independent Telecommunications Pioneers Association, and also executive director of Customer Excellence at Granite Government Communications Solutions. ITPA proudly presents today's session in collaboration with Electrosoft Services, Inc. Today's 8 to 11 a.m. session will address federal government challenges for cybersecurity, technologies, and policies for mitigating current and future to an ever-expanding IT networks and mobile infrastructure environment. Next chart talks a little bit about ITPA. And to talk about that a little bit is ITPA is a non-for-profit professional association created by and for the telecommunications industry. Dedicated to community service, the ITPA has been serving the public on behalf of telecom companies since 1920. Today's session is part of ITPA's ongoing and popular series of information exchange sessions, from in-person luncheons to now virtual sessions. Visit us as indicated on the website, on the chart, www.itpancc.org for more information. A little bit about what we do for communities is in the spirit of giving back, ITPA is honored to support the Capital Area Food Bank, Juvenile Diabetes Research Fund, and the USO, Washington area chapter. On the next chart, a little bit about who helped us get here today. From an ITPA event and organizational sponsor standpoint, I'm pleased to recognize the contributions and support of Avaya Government Solutions, BT, CenturyLink, Government, Corning, Crown Castle, Graybar, and Mettel. And now, to introduce a friend of mine and a colleague and collaborator for this particular event, Dr. Sabari Gupta, CEO of Electrosoft Systems, Inc. She has an impressive background in software development and professional services in both the public and private sectors, and expertise in cybersecurity, risk management, privacy, cyber solutions. She's a thought leader and a key player in the cyber space. Please join me in welcoming Electrosoft's Dr. Gupta.
Yes, now that I'm unmuted. Thank you very much, Denny. And good morning, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well this morning. At Electrosoft, we are really pleased to be collaborating with the ITPA on this inaugural Cybersecurity Transformation Summit. I hope all of you are as excited as I am about the sessions coming up. Now, Electrosoft as a company, we've been supporting federal government customers for about 19 years now. We got started in 2001. And what we do is we deliver technology-based services and solutions with a very strong focus on cybersecurity and identity management. So now on the next slide, I wanted to point out that we have a very broad base of government customers spanning the civilian sector as well as the defense sectors. And we are also fortunate to have a bunch of very important government contract vehicles and GWACs as well. So we are very easily accessible for services. Now on the next slide, so I wanted to talk about a few thoughts on the transformation journey myself, but I wanted to mention that we will be hearing from our two distinguished keynote speakers, as well as our expert panelists on various aspects of cybersecurity transformation that we are going through right now. But Electrosoft is a cybersecurity company. I thought it might be important to mention a few thoughts from our perspective, what we are seeing in the marketplace as well. So number one on my list is the use of automation. Now, with the complexity of cybersecurity increasing day by day, the amount of data that we have to gather and analyze is just mind-boggling. So the use of automation and automated tools is almost a must. It's not a choice. It's a must-have. Number two on my list is the fact that cybersecurity compliance activities also have been getting heavier and heavier for our federal agency customers. And so to manage this tremendous workload, much of which is done manually today, the compliance activities, we see an increasing interest in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and RPA, robotics process automation technologies, to streamline these mostly mechanical compliance activities, to make them not only more consistent, but also to reduce costs, for example. Number three on my list is zero trust architectures. Now, I'm sure most of you have heard this term, but what's happening in the federal environment today is, with the move to the cloud and the incorporation of mobile devices to access federal data from anywhere, anytime, and from any connected device, the cybersecurity boundary or perimeter is really getting much bigger than it used to be, and in some cases it's not very clear. And so many agencies and our customers are looking at zero trust architectures as a way to mitigate the resulting threat. And what this means is that every user is authenticated. So each user is authenticated for every meaningful transaction, rather than be considered a trusted entity because they've authenticated to their network. So which brings definitely higher assurance and security. And the final item on my list as an identity management company as well is the sort of move towards passwordless authentication. Now, we've all heard as cybersecurity professionals that passwords are a very weak form of authentication. However, we still use them, right? We have many, many passwords, each of us, I'm sure. But what we are seeing in the marketplace is a push towards the use of multi-factor authentication technologies that use cryptography and biometrics, and kind of leave the password on the table, I guess. So to move towards a reduced passwords or passwordless authentication. So those are just a few thoughts from my side. And then on the next slide, I wanted to recognize our event sponsors, Calvio Federal, Comcast Business, CommScope, Signacom Solutions, and Foxhole Technology. Without their support, this event would not have been possible. And so with that, over back to you, Denny.
Thank you so much. Just wanted to have a couple of housekeeping rules, updates that we need to be mindful of. Today, we want to welcome and bring forward our colleagues from industry, and you'll be hearing from one later in the moderation of the panel. Also, today's session is on the record, so we just need to be mindful of that as well. If you have questions, simply open the Q&A tab on your webinar tool and type in your question. I, as the MC and panel moderator, Jason Miller, will work to include your questions throughout the sessions. Any technical challenge you are having, use your chat box in your toolbar to chat with the webinar host. And then following the session today via email, you'll be getting a brief survey to capture your thoughts and feedback so that we can continuously improve what it is we do here. We appreciate if you take a few moments following the session and really fill that out. Again, it really will be helpful in our future quality input. Okay, on demand, the link will be available for your viewing pleasure later today. And that should be exciting, and that's a first for us, so we're excited about that. Okay, without further ado, on the next chart, I want to introduce a distinct pleasure of mine, our opening keynote speaker, Rick Driggers, Deputy Assistant Director for Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Mr. Driggers joined the Department of Homeland Security in 2003 as the Chief Technology Officer of NPPD. His distinguished career includes development as a member of many U.S. military and intelligence special ops forces and tactical teams, and received multiple military awards and decorations. So from us, ITPA and Electrosoft, we want to welcome CISA's Rick Driggers. Virtual applause. Yay. Rick, over to you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate the introduction, and love the action photo up there. That's about as much as I did. It's really great to be here with you all, and like many of you, I'm at home. I was actually doing a speaking event yesterday, and my 5-year-old decided to barge in and have some needs for me that were, from her perspective, more important than anything I was doing. So if that happens today, I do have 5 children here in the house. I apologize up front. So as was introduced, my name is Rick Driggers. I'm the Deputy Assistant Director for Cybersecurity. I work within the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Our agency is really focused on critical infrastructure, security, and resilience, and we work across the physical as well as the cybersecurity domain. But across those 2 domains, there's really 2 activities that underpin everything we do at Cisco. First and foremost, information sharing. We work very, very hard every single day across the interagency with our international partners, as well as with industry, to get as much information with as much context as we can and get that information out to those that need it to defend our networks, to secure our critical infrastructure, and to put defensive and protective measures in place. And that information might be about mitigations, it might be about a vulnerability, it may be technical data, but it also might be context around what a threat actor is doing or what TTPs or tradecraft a threat actor may be using. The second activity that underpins everything we do at CISA is really partnerships. And so we work every day to build and strengthen the partnerships that we have with industry, as well as with our international partners and with the other departments and agencies in the federal government, as well as in the state and local government. These partnerships are critical to being able to apply a collective defense perspective, particularly to cybersecurity risks and vulnerability and the threat landscape that is ever evolving. We work really hard to build trust. Sometimes that's difficult for a federal government to do that, to build trust with certain states, to build trust with certain parts of industry. But nonetheless, we work hard to do that every day, because we couldn't do particularly the cybersecurity mission without those partnerships. Last year, our director, Chris Krebs, unveiled our agency's strategic intent, which outlined both our strategic vision as well as some operational priorities. The 5 priorities that are outlined in that strategic intent are election security. We have a special emphasis on election security, working very closely in support of state and local governments who have the constitutional mandate to run and administer elections. And so we bring our capabilities, we bring the information that we have and our services to bear to support the state and local community with regards to election security. Second priority is supply chain risk management, which really involves cyber threats that we're seeing from China, and particularly the rollout of 5G technologies across the globe. And we have many different activities related to supply chain risk management. We have an industry, we have a public-private partnership for information, communications, and technology supply chain risks, as well as the Federal Security Advisory Council, which I represent for supply chain risks and vulnerability to the federal government. A third priority is protecting the federal government, or really the .gov. So my organization, my agency has the mandate to work with departments and agencies to help them with their cybersecurity efforts to protect departments and agencies' information networks and systems. And we do that through a myriad of programs and capabilities and service offerings that we provide to our partners across the civilian executive branch. A fourth priority is soft targets. So like I said at the onset of this, we do have physical security programs. So we have physical security programs around school safety, active shooter training, as well as other resources. We do vulnerability assessments and work with industry on a whole host of physical security programs across all 16 critical infrastructure sectors. And then the fifth priority is really critical infrastructure protection. And the focus there is really about industrial control systems. And so those processes and those those devices that really provide vital services that control a physical element of a chemical facility or a water treatment facility. And so we have a special emphasis on industrial control systems. We've put up a control systems interagency working group across multiple different departments and agencies at the federal government, so we can align our efforts to make sure that we're not duplicating and that our investments are in alignment with what what industry needs are. And so we've also brought industry, about 45 industry leaders into that interagency working group as well, to help guide us and to help shape the way that we move forward across 4 work streams. One of those is supply chain. Another one is workforce, which is a critical element, as well as incident management and standards and best practices. So, as we focus on these 5 priorities, we also work hand in hand with the critical infrastructure community across the government and with our international partners. And I want everybody here to know that, the mission hasn't stopped across the federal government or across many departments and agencies within state and local governments. Those vital services that our citizens depend on, those that underpin our national security, that underpin our economic security and public health and safety continue. But we've had to operate in new ways to ensure not only the health and safety of our employees, but also using new technologies like we're using today. I will tell you that this is probably the 2nd or 3rd time that I've done a keynote or some type of a speaking engagement using an online platform like this. So it's new to all of us. But I will tell you, I've been really proud of my agency's ability to perform under these conditions, particularly with a focus on responding to COVID-19, the pandemic here, but not at the expense of our other priorities. We continue to focus on election security. We've got an election coming up in November. We've got primaries that are ongoing. And so we continue with our other priorities, even while we have an acute focus on the COVID-19 response and the pandemic that's really gripped the globe. So over the past several months, as I said earlier, we've experienced an unprecedented and rapid evolving threat as COVID-19 spreads across the globe. And so today I'd like to talk about really 3 topics: threat landscape, what that looks like, activities that my agency is doing, and some of the other activities of other departments and agencies to protect the response to COVID-19, and then securing the digital transformation across government and industry. So on the threat landscape piece, it's really broken down into 4 primary areas: nation-state activity, phishing, and other scams, ransomware, and then disinformation. China has, a long history of being a bad actor and in cyberspace. It's been well documented, and it shouldn't really be anybody's surprise that they're continuing to go after critical organizations, not only in critical infrastructure writ large, but also those critical organizations that are involved in our nation's response to COVID-19. And China's not the only country. We expect, influence. China's not the only country that's going after our infrastructure either. We are experiencing, significant targeting from other nation-state actors like Russia, Iran, North Korea, as well as criminal actors. The targets really for COVID-19, as you can expect, are really around healthcare, pharmaceutical, research sectors, supply chains that are supporting those particular entities. There's a special emphasis on those entities that are in the process of developing or doing research to develop a vaccine. Earlier this year, my agency, along with the FBI, released basically a warning to organizations that are researching COVID-19 of likely targeting and network compromise by the PRC, the People's Republic of China. The administration's been pretty clear that we will defend our interests aggressively, and that there will be harsh consequences for anyone that threatens our response to the pandemic. And I will also say that we're working very closely with our international partners as well, particularly the UK, Australia, and some of the other Five Eyes countries. With regards to phishing attacks and scams, we've seen malicious cyber actors really capitalizing on the pandemic, using the virus to trick people to revealing personal information or downloading malicious software. We've seen emails containing malware that appear to be from the Director General or the World Health Organization, or from the Health and Human Services sector, or other nonprofits that are supposedly involved in the nonprofit, to basically offer thermometers and face masks and a whole host of other services. We've partnered, as I said earlier, with the United Kingdom's National Cybersecurity Center and released a joint alert in April outlining the growing number of threats that these types of organizations and these types of criminal actors and nation state actors are. We've also recommended to exercise caution. Obviously, phishing scams and other types of activity like this, we want to make sure that the citizens of our country and that departments and agencies and businesses alike are exercising caution when handling really any type of electronic form of communication with COVID-19 as the subject line or an attachment or some type of hyperlink. It's important that we be very wary of social media pleas, text messages, or calls related to the virus. And if you're unsure of whether an email or a text is legitimate, try to verify it directly by contacting the company yourselves, as opposed to relying on communication from them because you may have an email that's spoofed or something like that. So we've certainly seen, phishing campaigns writ large, particularly those impacting the healthcare sector, as well as state and local governments for the past, couple of years has been ramped up. Since I would say probably February, we've seen the tactics and techniques and procedures or the tradecraft of our adversaries move to COVID-19 themes with regards to those types of attacks. From a ransomware perspective, as I said, hospitals have been targeted along the lines of COVID-19 from really 2017 to 19, but hospitals have been the victim of nearly half of all of the reported ransomware attacks in those 2 years. In March, the attack shut down computers at the Campaign Urbana Public Health District in Illinois for 3 days. Meanwhile, at other hospitals in Bruna and Czech Republic, a ransomware attack resulted in the shutdown of its IT networks, cancellation of non-essential surgeries, as well as required rerouting of urgent patients to other hospitals. So these impacts are real, and they're just not shutting down computers that just need to be brought back up or backups. It's really impacting patients and the ability of these entities to actually deliver the healthcare services that they're meant to. So the healthcare sector is not the only sector that's fallen victim to recent attacks. We've seen cities and localities across the country, as well as school districts and law enforcement agencies have also been the recent ransomware victims. We work, as I said earlier, very closely with the FBI, and we've launched a couple of efforts. We're going to be launching a couple of efforts in the next couple of months that will not only meet these ransomware actors head on, but will also provide network defenders additional guidance and strategies to effectively combat against these types of threats. So as I said, we work very closely with departments and agencies across the federal law enforcement, the intelligence community. And so when we can and when our priorities align, we try to provide guidance. We try to provide services and capabilities from a united front. On the disinformation piece of this, we've seen a rise in disinformation campaigns, certainly around elections, but disinformation campaigns, they can cause significant harm through their ability to spread discord, manipulate the public conversation, influence policy development, and also disrupt markets and just stir unrest. We've been working with FEMA very closely, focused on helping the public distinguish between rumors and facts. We've launched a coronavirus rumor control page, which can be found at fema.gov. And we encourage the public to find the trusted source of information, share the information from trusted sources, and discourage others from sharing information from unverified sources. This is obviously a particular major issue on social media platforms where information can spread like wildfire. So talking real quick and shifting to, protecting the response and the efforts and the resources that we have. We've certainly been engaged in activities related to the COVID-19 response. And this, really began to increase across the federal government. Several departments and agencies began to see an uptick in potential malicious activity on their networks. Through our continuous diagnostics and mitigation program, my agency surge resources to the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the Small Business Administration, to help identify where an acceleration of CDM capabilities would help the agencies defend against an increase in threats, as well as to strengthen network protections to reinforce the security of the agency's important mission at work. And obviously, the Health and Human Services organization is really the center of gravity for the federal government's response to COVID-19. To date, our shared threat mitigation services, HHS, has accelerated the removal of over 7,000 fraudulent domains. In addition to assisting these agencies, the surge work is also providing lessons learned for how CISA can further support other departments and agencies in the future when circumstances such as COVID-19 pandemic arise. This is really the first time that we have taken a program like the Continuous Diagnostic and Mitigation Program and surged capabilities because of threat activity happening on a particular department or agency's networks and systems. So we've provided a lot of support to HHS. They've got a great team over there that we're working with, and we're going to learn a lot from the efforts of our team here at the agency, as well as HHS, to be able to be prepared for these types of activities in the future. So we've also been in coordination with the FBI, really working to identify members of the pharmaceutical sector, as well as identifying university labs and research institutes that are critical to our nation's COVID-19 response, and to really inform them of what the threat landscape looks like, what types of tradecraft and tactics and techniques and procedures our adversaries are using, and how to put in appropriate mitigations as well as defensive protective measures. And so far, we've notified about 165 critical entities of targeting, as well as that may have open critical vulnerabilities since the COVID-19 began. So as I said earlier, we work hand in hand with organizations and we offer a number of voluntary services and products, including cybersecurity risk management and resilience services and tools. We also provide technical assistance upon request, and we can also expand our information sharing capabilities to improve situational awareness of threats, vulnerabilities, incidents, mitigation, and recovery actions. To date, we've produced 32 COVID-related cybersecurity products highlighting actor tactics, indicators of compromise, specific malware varieties, as well as information about vulnerabilities in key sectors. In May, as an example, we issued a second alert with our partners in the UK National Cybersecurity Center, exposing malicious cyber campaigns targeting organizations that are involved or engaged in the coronavirus response. The advisory is for really international and medical research organizations, instructing staff to use strong passwords and implement two-factor authentication to reduce the threat of compromise. And although, creating a strong password and implementing two-factor authentication, if you're in the cybersecurity community, that's kind of basic football. Of course, everybody's going to do that, but it really does take a constant reminder to do the basics, to do the simple kind of 101 things to better protect your network and to raise your risk posture. And beyond that formal guidance, we also have technical services ranging from proactive vulnerability scanning to malware analysis. We have a vulnerability scanning service at no cost called Cyber Hygiene that really looks at internet-facing systems. It's an automated remote scan, and we provide a report identifying vulnerabilities and mitigation recommendations to improve the cybersecurity systems of those devices that you have connected to the internet. We've uploaded about 26 new healthcare sector entities to our Cyber Hygiene scanning service since the pandemic was declared. And to date, we've detected about 4,900 vulnerabilities across 21 entities. So that's pretty significant, where different entities have internet-facing devices. We can provide a scan of those, and that scan basically bounces off known vulnerabilities, whether they're critical, high, medium, or low. And then we provide a report. It's an automated report about what those vulnerabilities are and what you can do to mitigate against those. We also prioritize risk and vulnerability assessments. So we've shifted our focus to really hone in on the healthcare sector. And we've got in-depth on-site evaluations, including system-wide understanding of vulnerabilities, as well as full reports of vulnerabilities and recommended mitigations following the testing. So we can provide more than just the cyber hygiene of internet-facing devices on your network. We can come in and do very in-depth risk and vulnerability assessments, as you know, not only on the perimeter but also in your organization, networks internal. And so, you know, we are strongly encouraging members of the community, particularly the healthcare community and those other entities that are involved in the COVID-19 response, whether you're actually a healthcare entity or whether you're part of the supply chain that's providing them some type of important material or good, to reach out to us to leverage our services and to partner with the agency to protect the response from malicious cyber activities. So I want to shift now to talking about you know, how we're securing the digital transformation. And we've seen, you know, since COVID started, there's really a new digital transformation happening, and it's because of COVID. And the situation has forced, you know, many companies across the globe to rethink their business strategies and the technology that we're really all using to carry out our daily work. As an example, I talked about it earlier, the platform that we're using right now is new. This is a new way of operating. We host every or I should say biannually, an industrial control systems joint working group, which normally has about 200 to 300 people in person. This year we did it virtually, using a platform like this, and we had over 1,800 people sign up, and about 1,500 people actually attend. And we had representatives from over 400 countries that were part of the audience that participated in that. So while it is a new way of doing business, from a virtual perspective, from conferences and speaking engagements, you can really reach a lot more people if it's done correctly. So, you know, the traditional enterprise perimeter that has, you know, it's basically extended to our home networks for many organizations, and the perimeter is probably more than likely going to be permanent. I know my own agency is looking at, you know, how can we, you know, move to a more robust remote workforce posture, just because we've, I think, proven to ourselves that we can actually operate in an environment like this using the type of technology that's available. But it's going to require, you know, a much better understanding of our security posture as we run these operations remotely. Over the past several months, we've seen an uptick, as I said earlier, malicious cyber activity aimed at these new and often rapidly deployed remote access and teleworking tools and systems and infrastructure. This is concerning as bad actors see these tools and targets as a new opportunity, and so their tactics and their trade craft is going to shift to trying to exploit and find vulnerabilities within this type of infrastructure. So you know, from a resource perspective, to help network defenders, we've launched a dedicated product line intended to advise and support organizations with a surge in telework due to the COVID-19. And the goal is really to be the one-stop shop for digital transformation within the federal government to provide telework security guidance. To date, we've released multiple products. We've partnered with the NSA to produce a telework best practices guide. We've also provided cybersecurity considerations for use in video conference software and related collaboration tools, guidance for school districts, campus IT administrators, as well as end users such as teachers. We've also issued interim trusted internet connection or TIC guidance to aid agencies in securing their network and cloud environments. We're really calling on all the vendor community to leverage the interim guidance and map to the cybersecurity capabilities that are inherent to their products and services, to the TIC capabilities that support secure teleworking. we really want to partner with vendors so that they can use this opportunity to help agencies secure their networks and cloud services that are already being used. Over the next few months, we plan to leverage the feedback that we've received from agencies and vendors to integrate the features of this guidance into a more comprehensive TIC 3.0 remote user case. And so the feedback from vendors, and as I said at the beginning of my talk, collective defense. We cannot do cybersecurity. This isn't a problem or an issue that the government is going to be able to solve. There are many instances where the private sector is out in front of the federal government. My agency thinks that's okay. Private sector, take the lead. We want to leverage your expertise, your knowledge. We want to leverage your visibility that you have across the United States as well as across the globe, so that we can all benefit from that in a more robust defense posture for all of our nation, whether you're in the private industry or whether you're in the government. So, you know, our consolidated guidance and resources can all be found at CISA.gov. Organizations, you know, continue to adopt new digital solutions, both internally and externally. And my agency remains committed to helping our partners and working with industry, state and local, other departments and agencies. Business continuity today, you know, it seems almost impossible without the right technology in place. And our goal is really to ensure your organization's mission continues while decreasing your risk. That's what we are all about. We want to help you do cybersecurity better. We want to help you do physical security better. And there's a lot of programs and capabilities that we have. It's you know, as I have said throughout this, it's imperative that we work together to improve the security and resilience of our vital systems and functions. But you know, we're doing a lot, but we can certainly do more, and we want to do more. But as I said earlier, we need your help. So you know, please join us. Please work with us. Engage with us. Share with us. You know, help us become part of our information sharing program. Become part of some of our coordinating councils where industry helps us shape policies. They help us shape the plans and what the priorities are for my agency, so that we can make sure that we are meeting the needs of everybody. All of our services and capabilities are completely voluntary. We don't have a regulatory mission, and so it's okay to work with us. We're not going to come and put mandates on you. But we do need to do this. We do need to do this collectively. So I encourage all of you to reach out. I'm happy to connect with you, members of my team, to meet your individual needs, whether it's vulnerability scanning or many of the other services and capabilities that we have. And so very much appreciate your time today, and I look forward to questions.
Thank you very much, Director Driggers. I thought I knew something about CISA. It's clear I'm on chapter 1. You went through chapter 50, and there's a lot of amazing things that you are doing, and the challenge is real, and the evolving threat landscape is amazing. And I think you've touched on some of those. You piqued a lot of interest. I have 5 or 6 questions so far. If I could just read a few to you and get your thoughts on some of these issues. Okay, first one. It says CISA's core goal is defend today and secure tomorrow. Expand on securing tomorrow just a little bit.
Sure. Securing tomorrow is really an effort to strengthen critical infrastructure and really addressing the long-term risk. Defending today is about the vulnerability scanning, the risk and vulnerability you know, assessment services that we have, but we have to have an eye towards over the horizon and what those risks look like. And so, you know, we are certainly putting out today's fires. And if we just focus on that, if we focus on the 2-meter target, we're never going to get ahead of the adversary. So we want to work to build our capacity with our partners and really drive change and behavior long-term, particularly in the cybersecurity area. And the theory is really simple. If we can identify and prioritize our medium and long-term risks, then we can really focus on them to ensure that they're addressed when we get there. And so, you know, we do a lot of work across the critical infrastructure, state and local government, as well as state. And so in order for us to understand what the risk landscape looks like in the future, we really need a collaborative planning to identify what those long-term outcomes need to be, like recommended security measures or capability maturity levels. So, as an example, my agency is, racing right now to be able to secure the cloud environment that many departments today are going to. And so while we're doing that, that's great. But what is the next type of infrastructure, virtual infrastructure that, or cyber networks and infrastructure that is on the horizon, that isn't deployed yet, that hasn't been maybe developed fully? So if we can get engaged with those entities that are developing that type of infrastructure, then we can start to plan now what type of defensive measures, what type of capabilities we need to be able to secure that environment. Because a lot of times, the next version of infrastructure like cloud, cloud wasn't built to be more secure. Cloud was built to be more efficient and to be more beneficial to society, to scale services and to scale services and information. So that's
excellent response. Another question, if I could.
Yep.
This is kind of interesting. You described the four big nation state actors, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. What do you see as the fifth threat?
So I think the fifth threat is really, the emerging threat actor, whether it's a criminal, whether it's a what we call a hacktivist. So activists doing things to shut down different types of services and capabilities to get a point across. We like to kind of group all of those into a group called emerging threats, and those can be anywhere from organized crime to terrorist organizations, and just to your run-of-the-mill hacker that's trying to make some money on the side by deploying some malware somewhere. And so we push all of that together. I think from a I would step aside from specific threat actors. I think that there are two, if I was going to talk about threats, there's probably two big threats. One of them is really a tactic or a tradecraft around ransomware, and us being able to put in place the defensive measures to protect against ransomware attacks. Because ransomware attacks are, for the most part, fairly easy. The tradecraft or the tactics and techniques and procedures that adversaries use to deploy ransomware don't cost them a lot of money. It doesn't require, any type of enhanced capability, and it doesn't necessarily, and they can do it a lot, right? They can pretty much hit a lot of infrastructure at the same time. So I think ransomware is a huge issue. And there's a lot of nation state actors as well as criminals that are using that type of attack vector. And then the other threat, quite frankly, is really just, if I was going to talk about our nation's complacency with regards to cybersecurity and not really thinking through how important to shore up our virtual infrastructure, our tools and devices. I think different organizations that are critical, that are supplying critical or vital services or goods as part of a supply chain, or just are providing services that our citizenry depend on. I think they roll the dice every day that they're not looking at their cybersecurity risks, and so we've got to continue to kind of beat the drum about cybersecurity and how important it is. So that we can kind of collectively raise the risk posture or the defensive posture of all entities across our nation.
Excellent answer. Okay, another one kind of interesting. It's timely. How well positioned is CISA to execute its nationwide election security strategy in 2020?
So we are, I will say that we are much better positioned now than we have ever been. In the past, we really started to focus in on election infrastructure at the beginning of 2016, heading into the 2016 elections. You know, and from that point, it's continued to be a top priority for my agency to really protect those nations. You know, right now we're less than 150 days from Election Day 2020, and we are vigorously working with 5,000 state and local officials, all the major technology vendors, whether it's voting systems, social media platforms, or threat intelligence firms, to ensure that election officials have the information they need, and that we have all the services and capabilities that my agency offers so that they can protect their systems and they can be responsive to. We know that our adversaries view the November election as a huge opportunity to our democracy, and we need to make sure that we're controlling this environment so that we can build resiliency into systems and voters. Sorry, we could build resilient systems and voters voting machines to their attempts. So we want to make sure that we understand exactly what the adversary is doing in this area. So we're working very closely with our law enforcement, working very closely with our intelligence community. We're also learning from other international partners that have different voting systems and parameters, and we're taking all of that and we're making sure that we're in a position to really support the state and local government to be able to protect their systems and make sure that voters have the ability to vote and that their vote counts, and it counts the way that they voted. And so we're doing regular election infrastructure vulnerability assessments. We're engaging with our partners. We're sharing threat information. We're sharing mitigation tactics, and we're going to continue to do that through 2020. Election security is not a priority for my agency in FY20 just because of the election. Election security has been a priority for my agency since 2016, every single year, and it will continue to be going forward. So,
excellent answer.
Yeah.
Just a few more questions, if I could.
Yep.
Looks like this is from a government employee, and the question is, how does an organization foster a culture of cyber readiness?
Yeah, so cyber readiness is important. I mean, it's imperative to adopt best practices and entities and really take a layered approach to security. We're obviously here to help organizations, what their relative cybersecurity maturity is. We promote best practices and common risk, and by conducting risk assessments. We also, at least across federal departments and agencies, we provide cyber risk profiles for various different departments and agencies, so that their chief information security officer can take that information to their leadership so that they can have a better justification to put in for budget dollars to be able to bring in new capabilities. And from a national perspective, we see gaps between what an entity may consider adequate security for themselves or their sector, and really what is in the public's best interest. Across the government and really also critical infrastructure sectors, we see common problems such as outdated applications, operating systems, and it's essential that organizations update their software, update their operating systems with the latest patches. Tools to fix these problems and significantly enhance the resilience of internet and communications ecosystems are really widely available, but we have seen them not necessarily applied evenly across these various different markets. And I think that probably in the past 3 or 4 years, the federal government, I would say 3 or 4 years ago, the federal government was probably lagging behind industry with regards to how we apply and how we look at cybersecurity and what our risk posture was. And I think in many aspects, the federal government is ahead based on the work that not only my agency has done, but what other departments and agencies, chief information officers and chief information security officers have done. And so many of you know that we work very closely with the National Institute of Standards, particularly with their cybersecurity framework. That's one of the best practices, along with other agency best practices, that we use to help organizations frame decisions that should be made and at what level those should be made. And so implementing common security standards really will go a long way in protecting our nation's networks and really imposing cost on the adversaries. There are a lot of things that we can do across not only the federal government, but also private industry that don't cost a lot of money. I mentioned it earlier, strong passwords, two-factor authentication, many of the tools and technical infrastructure that we use in our environments have the ability to use two-factor authentication, but for whatever reason, those switches aren't tagged, or those buttons aren't toggled to turn that on because of convenience and things of that nature.
Super. Great answers, great perspective. Okay, I have one from the media that's interesting. Ask Rick to talk more about CDM surge with HHS and SBA. What did they do and what results did they see?
So as I said earlier, we've taken down about 7,000 domains or bad IPs off of HHS, and what we've done is we have surged some of our hunt and incident response capabilities because of the constant probing from particular nation state actors across multiple different parts of health and human services and the Small Business Administration. We have worked very closely with their department CIOs and chief information security officers to shore up their defensive posture and to put new mitigation procedures or practices in place, and in some cases install patches where patches weren't installed. And so we remain engaged with those two entities, but really the team at HHS and the team at SBA has done remarkable work around the clock, and we are there to work, help, and support them. If you want specific details about the ongoings inside HHS and SBA, I would recommend that you reach out to them, and they will share what information they deem appropriate.
Thank you. Only two more questions, I promise, Rick, and thank you for your time and patience today. Is Zero Trust architecture part of the goals for tomorrow or for today? How is CISA trying to move this concept into the cloud?
Yeah, so we are certainly looking at zero-based architectures because we want to make sure that a couple of things. If you've got something connected to the internet, it needs to be connected to the internet because of the particular function, that it isn't connected to the internet necessarily out of convenience. With regards to credentialing and things of that nature, we're certainly looking at all of the best practices and standards. So as we build our cloud environment and as we look to departments and agencies' cloud environment, that we have the Zero Trust architecture best practices and standards integrated within those environments. And so that particular concept is incredibly important, really from A to Z, and really should be looked at not at the end, but at the beginning of any engineering to build out a cloud environment, or really any type of environment. And you need to look at your users and the various different accesses that they have across that environment with regards to tools and information and data. And so we're taking Zero Trust very seriously as we look to evolve our CDM capabilities, as well as the capabilities of our National Cybersecurity Protection System that protects the various different departments and agencies with our sensors that we have deployed. I hope that answers the question.
Yep, well, I think it did. The last two, I promise. This one is from a government colleague, and how does the cyber workforce of tomorrow look like? And advice for rising cyber stars. Why CISA?
No, I appreciate the question. This is a huge issue. If you look at the 2019 report that came out from ICS2, we've got about a 500,000 gap or shortage in our current U.S. cybersecurity workforce. The statistics tell us that in order to meet today's demands, just in the U.S., the cybersecurity workforce has to grow by 65%. So what we have to do is we have to really think outside the box with regards to how we are building and sustaining a cybersecurity workforce for America. And from my perspective, this is a national imperative, and we need government, academia, as well as the private sector to come together to figure out how we can address this issue of our nation's cybersecurity workforce shortage. We are, my agency is working with the Department of Education, working with NIST, as well as the Department of Labor, the National Science Foundation, as well as other parts of state and local governments and the private sector to put in place kind of innovative ways, right? So right now we know that we've got we've got these 4-year college programs, we've got scholarship for service. I don't, and those are great and critical programs to being able to put kids and quite frankly adults onto a pathway for a cybersecurity career. My agency just took over the Reskilling Academy from the Office of Personnel Management. So we're looking for ways to reskill current federal employees so that we can take those employees that are interested in cybersecurity and move them into a cybersecurity job in the federal government by developing a reskilling academy so that they can get the knowledge, but more importantly, the skills and ability to be able to get into a federal cybersecurity position. And likewise, I think we need to do more in the K through 12. We haven't put enough emphasis on K through 12, and there's been kind of a smattering of different programs that are really excellent, but there's really no strategic thread across K through 12 to really not only empower and support teachers that are providing cybersecurity electives or some type of cybersecurity program within their school, but other types of efforts to get kids interested in cybersecurity. To let them know that that's a viable career or a viable job, and bring them out of, as a senior, if I'm a senior in high school and I don't really want to go to college, I don't really want to go into the military, how do I get into cybersecurity? There's really no way unless somebody just basically tries their luck on you. But if we could develop a pipeline, almost like a trade school, like we do with electricians or like we do with plumbers or carpenters, then we could get kids out of high school, we could get them into an apprenticeship, we could get them into a journeyman level where they could actually get a paid job. If they want to turn that into a career, they can, but that's a pathway that we haven't built yet into the cybersecurity, into the cybersecurity workforce. And I think that that is something that we should focus on as a nation, and my agency certainly is. With regards to, I think you mentioned rising stars in cybersecurity. Look, the technical skills are great. We obviously need subject matter experts. We need people that understand how to put their hands on keyboards and do things. But it isn't all about the technical skills. It's also about being creative, being a problem solver, having a strong work ethic, and really also those soft skills around strong communications, being collaborative. Those are all also very important for a cybersecurity professional and what they bring to the team.
Excellent answer. And boy, you've covered the waterfront and done an amazing job in doing so. Last question. This is a 30-second one, so answer it as you will. What key takeaway would you like to share with this government industry audience that you have today?
Sure. So, I think we need to, we have to get the advantage to the defender. As I said earlier, partnerships and information sharing. Defenders need information, they need context, and they need support. And when I say defender, I'm talking about a cyber network defender. They can't take action if they don't know where the threat is, if they don't necessarily understand tradecraft and TTPs, and if they don't have the available resources they need to defend the networks and systems and communication devices that really underpin almost every business and entity. And so we're making it too easy for attackers, by operating independently. Our adversaries, they're not distinguishing between public and private, and neither should we. And that's why, my agency has such a strong emphasis on partnerships, because our adversaries are going after really everything. And so government and industry, we've got to work together really now more than ever. We've got to take it serious about improving our collective defense across the board. And so for the past several years, we've made significant progress. I think on our long-term security goals through established partnership structures and frameworks, including our sector coordinating councils, which every single critical infrastructure sector has. They have a sector coordinating council, which is representative of private sector entities to be able to come in and help my agency help shape our policies, our processes, our procedures, what our priorities are, working very closely with information sharing and analysis centers, as well as the CPAC, our Critical Infrastructure Partnership Advisory Council. And I want to put a special emphasis on state and local. Although state and local writ large isn't a critical infrastructure sector, the state and local networks and systems that underpin really all of the services that our citizens depend on for simple things like, being able to drive, to get a driver's license, training, access to different grants and things of that nature for kids that are going to college. So we've established a state and local territorial tribal government coordinating council so that we can have state and local representatives come and also help us shape our policies and procedures, and so that we understand more collectively what are the priorities and what are the challenges of the state and local government, so that we can make sure that we are positioned to support them as well.
Absolutely, that's all the questions, and absolutely outstanding job, Rick. And I want to thank you from all of our perspectives in terms of the great job you did and the amount of data you covered. So, and the audience was obviously very interested based on all the questions we got. So thanks again. And I'm happy to report. And by the way, congrats to your kids who didn't interrupt your speaking assignment. So congrats to them as well. Appreciate your time. And I would like to move on now and to keep us on schedule. I think we're right on 1 minute behind, which is not bad at all. Okay, now our next guest, and I got to pick on him a little bit because he's a friend of mine. I don't often admit this, but I got most of his background from the FBI, so that tells you a bunch. Just kidding. I'm pleased to introduce our next segment of our panel, Transforming Your Cybersecurity Footprint Forward. With our distinguished government and industry expert, it is my privilege to introduce our moderator, Jason Miller, who is terrific, I might add, Executive Director, Federal News Network. Jason directs the news coverage on a broad range of federal issues, technology and procurement, including cybersecurity, e-government, acquisition policies and programs. He also produced several news series, among them on whistleblowing, retaliation at the SBA, shared services, procurement reform, and many, many more. Please join me in a warm Electrosoft ITPA welcome for our moderator extraordinaire, Jason Miller.
Thanks, Danny. I could be a moderary too. I mean, I'll take any title. I'm good on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Denny, Deirdre Murray, and all the folks at ITPA and Electrosoft for inviting me to moderate the panel. This is fun. I've gotten to do several of these virtual panel moderations, and I'm getting better at it. You guys are getting better as an audience, getting used to it, so I appreciate that. As you heard, I'm Jason Miller, Executive Editor of Federal News Network, and of course, you can find us on federalnewsnetwork.com, and of course, 1500 AM. If you still have one of those radios in your houses or in your cars, the AM button still works, I promise. Now, if you've seen me moderate before, I like to usually start with a little trivia. Obviously, that's a little more difficult with online panels. So instead, let me just give you a few facts to get you thinking, to get the blood flowing if you haven't had enough coffee yet this morning. These are just factual things to get us kind of set up for our conversation. So here we go. Last September 2019, 10-year anniversary of OMB's first Trusted Internet Connections TIC memo. I know Sean Connolly, who's on the panel here, is probably thinking how much younger he and I both looked back then. It was the last time, at that time, OMB actually thought agencies would have just 50 internet gateways across the government. 50, that was a good dream. April, this just past April, 6 years since GSA first laid out its plan under the network's 2020 strategy, which, as we know, the EIS, Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions piece, is a central part of that effort. It's been 6 years, and here we are still complaining about why transition takes so long. And then finally, civilian agencies spent more than $16 billion on cybersecurity, faced more than 28,000 cyber attacks last year, with email phishing continuing to be the largest threat. Well, this year, this is interesting. Attrition, or what they call, brute force type of attacks, and multi-attack vectors are among the biggest increases year over year. This is according to the FISMA, Federal Information Security Management Act report to Congress that came out just about a month ago. So that just gives you something to think about as we get started in our discussion today. And if you've seen me moderate before, you know how I like to do this. I like to be informal. I love audience participation. So please ask lots of questions. But what we're going to do is each speaker, I've asked them to take 3 to 5 minutes and tell you something you don't know. If you don't know who Sean Connolly is, look him up. He's on the internet. I promise you. If you don't know what CISA is and you weren't there for Rick's backgrounder, look that up too. I promise you it's there. I'll probably ask one follow-up question for each of the panelists, and then we'll get to your Q&A. Please submit your questions through the box. I will be, you can do it through the regular chat or through the specific Q&A box. Remember, I ask questions all day. That's my job. I'd really want to hear from you all. So as I said, I really don't do much in terms of bios and introductions. So Sean, I'm going to put you on the spot and let you lead off and tell us something we don't know about TIC. Give us an update on the program. Tell us something that you haven't told us before.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Thanks to IPTA for the opportunity to speak. So again, my name is Sean Connolly. I work for CISA. I lead the TIC program at CISA, the Trusted Internet Connections Jason was talking about earlier. Just a little background on myself. I've been at CISA since 2013, but as Jason said, I've been supporting the TIC initiative since its initial rollout in the late 2000s. I've also supported the CDM program at CISA, the Einstein 3 rollout. More recently, I was one of the authors on the IT modernization report to the president in 2017. And more recent than that, I was on the NIST Zero Trust Special Pub 800-207. And I think all of those, CDM, Einstein, IT modernization, and the Zero Trust Special Pub, all have relevance. And then also, one of the most important collaborations we have is Jim Russo, which we'll talk in a second, where we've been working with GSA, the EIS team, for years leading up for TIC-3. So as Jason was saying, TIC-3 is really a game changer from where we were at TIC-2. TIC-2 is that traditional perimeter, that castle and moat architecture we talk about. And so with TIC-3, what we're doing now is, and this is led through OMB, Suzette and Grant Schneider, is you start, when you read the new memo, you read the tone in there, you read about the new strategy, the new architectures that are available, and the visibility that's going to be looked at. And I think what's interesting, what I think Jason was alluding to, was with TIC-3, we have a whole new playing field. We have a new way to look at federal cybersecurity. And one of the encouraging things is, once we get to the point where we release our traditional documents, then you're going to see a much more collaborative approach between industry, between agencies, between the other TIC stakeholders, if you will, in terms of what architectures do we want to support, including zero trust. Almost every day, I'm in a discussion about zero trust, either with an agency, industry, with our leadership. So zero trust is really on the mind of a lot of different people. We want to make sure, as we roll out TIC-3, that there is a component of a heavy zero trust component in TIC.
All right, Sean, there's plenty there to follow up on. And in fact, I was lucky enough to hang out with you yesterday, well, virtually, of course, when you give a similar presentation to the Information Security Privacy Advisory Board, the ISPAB, from NIST. So I'm gonna throw a couple questions that kind of brings that in as well. I know you've talked in the past about these use cases. You've talked about zero trust, IoT, EIS use cases. So give me a sense of where we're at today with the TIC 3.0 rollout, where we are with the drafts and the finals. And then also, there's also a cloud interface reference architecture as well that's being, it's under development. Can you walk us through what that is?
Yeah, sure. So as Jason was talking about, in December, our office released a number of TIC documents. They're in draft form. There is a guidebook, a reference architecture, how we're going to roll out those use cases. In January and some of February, we then had a request for comment period open for anyone, agencies, industry, citizens to comment on those documents. And then since then, we've been adjudicating those comments. I think we've had close to around 400 comments between the different stakeholders. And then when the pandemic hit and we saw this enormous surge in telework. We had to pivot pretty quickly to start supporting the demands that are coming from agencies about all these new possibilities with telework, and just not only the capacity challenges I think some agencies were having, but also the new architectures. They really want to explore new types of ways for their users to get to their data. And so when we did that pivot, the documents that we released in December, first we had expected to release those documents sometime in the spring, but because we had to shift our focus to support the telework surge, then we've pushed the rollout, if you will, those core documents, as we call them, to sometime this summer. So the first ending of phase one, as we call it, is when those documents come out, and a number of stakeholders have a review between GSA and OMB and ourselves and a couple others. So the key point is we are looking to get through phase one, and then we can start going on to what Jason was talking about with more use cases. In the OMB memo, it outlines a number of use cases: infrastructure as a service, software as a service, PaaS, email, a few others. So that's what we call phase two. So we get through phase one, get those core documents out, then we can start focus on phase two, those use cases I mentioned. When we do that, we will work with the Federal CISO Council, and we'll start having agencies do a number of pilots supporting those use cases. So we'll have some agencies that may support an infrastructure service use case. Other agencies may support like a PaaS or SaaS use case. When those pilots are nearing completion, then CISA, we will then distill lessons learned from those pilots, put them into the use case. We'll work through the Federal CISO Council to release those use cases out to the greater community. So we're always going this continual, perpetual pace of use cases being developed and released. And we already have on our radar, even when we get through those use cases I mentioned there in the memo, the SaaS, PaaS ones, we already expect some other ones. Zero Trust I mentioned. We may actually try to push up or push forward the Zero Trust use case even. We've also discussed the Internet of Things use case and a few others, including one through GSA and the EIS acquisition vehicle. So there's a lot of opportunity there. What's really going to drive where we go forward, though, is the agencies and just the greater community in general. Where do we need to put our resources to support them? So that's the roadmap for the next year or so, I think, in terms of release. But again, all that happens after we get through releasing our core documents. We're getting toward the final stage of releasing.
All right, there's so much more I could talk to you about, but we'll move on to some of the other panelists. Jim Russo from GSA, give us an update about what your work is with EIS.
Okay. Good morning, Jason, and thanks to the ITPA and Electrosoft for joining me to this August panel here. And I've even rearranged some of my shelf articles here just to freshen it up a little bit for you. I think people got tired of looking at the Eagles sweater back there. So yeah, it's interesting that I'll tell you something you don't know starting off. How about that? You know, I had before joining the EIS program back in 2014, which I think you mentioned at the beginning of this, I had just come off a pretty strong partnership with working with DISA on our commercial SATCOM program. So it was a little surprising that when CISA, or I guess DHS at the time, approached us and said, hey, we'd like to partner with you as you're building the EIS requirements, and we'd like to make sure that you have your cybersecurity requirements really baked in. And we didn't initially embrace that. You know, I guess we were kind of reluctant to embrace requirements that we knew were in evolution, and we didn't jump in with both feet. Let me put it that way. But luckily, we got over that very quickly. As Sean indicated, we've been working very closely ever since, and we've certainly incorporated the CISA requirements and actually adjusted the contract in terms of adding, modernizing the solutions that we offer in lockstep with what we would need to do to offer TIC and TIC3 solutions going forward. So we do have a strong partnership. as Mr. Driggers mentioned, it's okay to work with CISA. So we certainly are poster children for that. GSA has a little bit different role in this, maybe a more expansive role than some people may think. Of course, we're responsible for the acquisition updates, so making solutions available and working with industry and agencies to sort of match up the requirements with solution sets. But when the OMB policy came out that Sean referred to back in September, GSA was given a couple of other roles. To be a stakeholder in approving the use cases, or in terms of, okay, we're going to participate in use cases that we'll build solutions to, and the involvement as a stakeholder in the pilot programs as well, as agencies come up with them and pitch them, and more, I guess, most importantly, in terms of outreach, we've really utilized our tools and our relationships with industry and our customer agencies to spread the news and spread the word about the TIC3 guidance. We've used our communication channels such as Interact and our YouTube channel to put some video and collateral out there and keep it top of mind for the agencies. In addition, we do a lot in terms of helping agencies and industry, for that matter, with answering questions as agencies are considering, okay, I've got my legacy MTIPS service today, the Managed Trusted IP service, and I want to move to a TIC3 environment. How do I do that? So we've got solicitation assistance tools that we make available to the agencies. And we've also looked at collateral capabilities and services that will help with employing and enabling a TIC3 solution. Starting with encouraging agencies to modernize their transport choices, going from legacy transport to Ethernet based. Recently adding the software-defined wide area network as a service to EIS, where it was in scope. In fact, we wrote about it back in 2014 with the initial drafts, but we thought it would be best to create a service with sort of standardize it, at least to give a baseline for what an SD-WAN service should include. Updating our secure cloud access capabilities or features within our transport services. And so we see those as enabling TIC3 solutions, and we see TIC3 as an integral part of modernizing going forward to zero trust architectures, zero trust solutions, for instance, and incorporating access from more access in terms of mobility and upcoming 5G. So all of that sort of rolls together in terms of how we basically create the bridge between the OMB and CISA guidance to agency requirements to industry solutions.
One thing that comes to mind as we talk about TIC3 and EIS and coming together is you mentioned the collateral tools and some of the things you guys are doing to help agencies. I think the transition to TIC3 under EIS, are you starting to see that request? Are we still too early because TIC3 still hasn't maybe gotten up and going? Or my impression is agencies are a little chomping at the bit here to move out of TIC2 into TIC3. What some of the trends are you seeing through some of the fair opportunity solicitations and other things under EIS?
Yeah, there is an interest to move forward. The safe move is keep what you have in terms of the agency transition, especially when it comes to TIC. So there's a number that have literally said, okay, I have MTIPS today. I still have to figure out how my network is going to be modernized, how I'm moving to the cloud, and therefore let me just move over, transition with MTIPS, and then very quickly move on from that and put something in place that minimizes the restrictions that the MTIP service really lays on when you're trying to access access cloud services and resources. So there's a definite interest in moving to more modern TIC solutions, and we feel that it really is a little bit of a paradigm shift in that the agencies have to look at this as a problem. It's not really selecting from a menu and saying, oh, I want a solution that will solve the branch office use case. It's not going to be quite simple. It's something that sort of have to look at in terms of what are the requirements, and leverage in I think a great set of tools that are out there. Leverage what other agencies are doing. There's some pilots going on. Of course, the CISA TIC guidance documents give you a lot of information in terms of determining what security capabilities are required, and lays out some of the security patterns in terms of how data will flow or can flow in certain situations, in certain use cases. We're encouraging use of pilots, proofs of concept, and at the end of the day, the agency has to determine how much of that do they want to try to integrate themselves, and how much of that do they want to lean on one of the industry partners to create a managed service. So there's a lot to absorb when agencies consider that step from pushing the MTIPS easy button to a TIC 3 solution. So we're along for the ride on that, and we're trying to collaborate with all to make that an easier ride for everybody.
All right, so there's a lot there, but let's move on to some of the other panelists. Larry Gloss from Blue Vector. Tell us something we don't know about cybersecurity and what you guys are seeing in the market.
Hi, Jason. Larry Gloss here. Thank you very much. And before I jump in, I just want to thank ITPA and Electrosoft, everyone at Comcast Business and Blue Vector. Feel very privileged to be a part of this conversation. I'm from Chicago, so I think the thing that everyone needs to know, people from Chicago typically do not have English as their first language. So I apologize if I mispronounce or use bad grammar or God forbid swear. That's the thing I'll share. And it's interesting to me when I heard Deputy Assistant Director Drigger's talk, I particularly resonated with one of the last things he said and some of the first things he said. But of all the things that he mentioned that I'd like to kind of pivot off of is this idea of giving the advantage to the defender. Jason, you mentioned, 10 years ago, over 50 gateways. We know it's at least 51 right now. There's defenders at each of those gateways. How do we help those defenders? And if I share one thing with you from my side of the fence, almost everybody asks me, whether they're a buyer or a seller, whether they're a policy person or a technologist, who is your competition? And I tell them, I'll tell everyone on the phone here, we all of us have the same competitor. It's the noise in the market space. And let me give you one quick example. If you Google 3 simple words, cyber technology landscape, and then click on images, you're going to see this series of, they almost look like placemats on the dinner table where the offer says, hey, the cybersecurity space is defined by X amount of key functions. And within each function, dozens, if not hundreds of companies populate that given function for cybersecurity defense. Now imagine color coding each of those that say, purport that they do machine learning and artificial intelligence. And if you saw a trend line of the number of companies that did that, say 2 years ago, and now, wow, it's exploding in color. There is a lot of noise out there. So in terms of giving the defender the advantage, here are some things I'd like us to share and discuss, the things that matter to me. For people, the TIC 3 leadership, the TIC 3 cybersecurity leadership, avoid false choices. In terms of the mission imperative, you need to be as religiously concerned about pre-breach detection capabilities as post-breach. A raft of machine learning technologies are all about detecting anomalous behaviors. Absolutely righteous, absolutely need to do that. Don't limit yourself to that, because somewhere along the line, something bad happened to drive that bad behavior. So be equally committed to considering the content, the detection of content that drives that bad behavior. Help the defenders, in fact, become attackers. Enable them to get that content before it gets into the network. And then the last thing I'd like to offer, at least on the mission imperative side, if you consider the very elegant and effective construct of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, that is a systemic way you break down all the bad things bad actors do to bring down an enterprise. Be equally committed to pre-breach detection capabilities as you are post-breach. So that's the mission imperative I'd want to suggest we discuss. And then finally, the second element I'd like to discuss is this idea of the data science of machine learning overall. I'm a sailor, I'm from Chicago. If I could handle some basic constructs, certainly everyone on this panel, certainly everyone in the audience can. Here are the things to think about. It's really about understanding the training data and the feature space of a given technology. Very quickly, the more precise, the more intricate, the more sophisticated the encoding of the feature sets and the use of training data, the more effective, the more accurate the capability is going to be. So in comparing and contrasting technologies, compare and contrast how those technologies approach the training data and the feature space. And then finally, the last thing I'd like to offer up, and this is one of the first things Deputy Assistant Driggers mentioned. He said his top two priorities are about cyber resilience and information sharing. So within your specific environment, in considering a machine learning capability, the fundamental question to ask, how does the machine learning learn? There is no perfect 100% solution. So when it's less than 100%, how does that machine learning take the delta and bring it back to the advantage of the defender? And then even more importantly, and consider a God forbid use case, consider a purple state polling station on the East Coast that's hit by a zero-day malware. And we learn from it instantly. How is that learning shared? Across the country, when a zero-day happens, how does the machine learning share that, transmit it? The Deputy Assistant Director Driggers also mentioned this idea of sharing global learning, sharing DHS learning with subscribers. How does the machine learning contribute to that in real time? So these are the things, from an ecumenical standpoint, I'd offer the cybersecurity professionals of the TIC management, the TIC leadership team. These are the things that have to be understood and spoken about and offered to help make that defender an attacker. So thank you, Jason. I'll shut up now.
All right. Well, one quick follow-up or two. Actually, two. Sure. Let me start with one. Cubs or White Sox?
Oh my gosh, Cubs.
Very nice, very nice. That was the easy one. I want to go back to something you said about helping the defenders, help the defenders become attackers. You talked to pre-breach detection.
Yep.
I think somebody goes, how do I know what I don't know? Or how do I know what's happening that I don't know what's happening? So walk me through maybe a little bit about what you mean by pre-breach detection and how does that fit into this broader conversation?
Sure. So imagine you're going to, Jason, I know you're a motorhead, you like heavy rock. So imagine you're going to a rock and roll concert and invariably, and this is pre-COVID, I'm thinking of, you're going to enter the stadium and you have to go through a metal detector of some sort. That metal detector is going to find something bad on you, a knife, a gun, etc. But there are lots of ways a knife can be implemented and designed, not just the straight knife sense, but also there are plenty of ways to disguise something that could in fact become a knife. Now, instead of a knife from a network sense, it's documents. It's a Word document, Excel spreadsheet, Microsoft executables. Within each of those, there are ways to disguise the underlying code that in fact are indicative of a malware attack. So it would be about the defender being able to categorically look at the DNA of anything that's coming into the network and either looking at the absence of known good things or finding something that looks a little bit different. The genetic code of this Word document looks a lot different than anything we've learned in our training data, than anything we've coded in our feature space. Stop it. Let's take a look at it. That's kind of what I'm thinking about.
And of course, that goes back to your comment about machine learning and potentially AI and things of that nature, how they fit in there.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go to our final panelist, and I'm going to remind the audience, don't forget to ask questions, send them in. We're going to get to them shortly. But Bill from I'm going to ruin it, Bill. You tell me. Acalivio.
Acalvio.
Acalvio. There you go.
Acalvio.
It was a tongue twister on my end.
So it's so Calvio is Latin for deception, and A is for the autonomous side. So the company is actually around what we call autonomous deception or deception 2.0, and this has really been good. And I also want to thank ITPA and Electrosoft and Dr. Gupta for sponsoring this and having this event. This is really good, and it's great to hear all the panelists so far that's talked, and also Mr. Girders. I actually had some opportunity to work in the past with DHS S&T on cyber.gov on zero trust software-defined perimeter type of deployment. So again, those are concerns I think across the board. And some of the things I've been thinking about, I was involved in an insider threat conference before COVID shut everything down. And it was interesting to hear because it all kind of comes together in looking at, okay, we have APTs, we have insider threat. There's a couple of different ways to look at it, right? We have the machine learning side, we have predictive analytics, and the conference, until I actually spoke on the physical side, the actual implementation side, was all around the personas. Who are these guys that are trying to get on the network, right? It could be a kinetic event, it could be a cyber event. And for one case in point was some folks from Canada, an agency up there, their dwell time was 171 days. And it's like, you guys are kidding me, right? This is crazy, because whatever case you're trying to build against that person, whether you're using SIM or SOAR or some other tool, it's too late. By the time you build a case here in the United States, if it's somebody at DHS, an insider there, it's too late that the information's gone. Snowden, for example. So how do we mitigate those threats quicker, right? And there's different ways to do that. Now we talk about predictive analytics. But also too, we can look at new cyber defensive capabilities, whether it's through deception or through other things. But again, we've got to shorten that dwell time, identify these guys quicker, and really leverage the fact that we can use machine learning and AI. How do we tighten that gap? And one thing that was interesting that Mr. Girders brought up was about physical and logical. Right, that's another really, I think, important attack point if you look at critical infrastructure. Right, one of the things we did around software-defined perimeters is say, okay, you have physical and logical security together at, let's say, a DOE site. Now, the way people are getting in, right, you have multiple contractors that are working the perimeter side of the thing from gates and door strikes and cameras. That's all being coalesced into a jump host, right? So if you have a bad contractor, he can leverage, if he's from XYZ security company, he can leverage his camera or whatever interface, now get into that jump host and pivot into the network. So again, you've got these numerous different attack vectors that we have to get more proactive with. And it was very interesting. I've had some of the DoD customers we're working with, we're really looking at, proactive defensive cyber ops is really what we're trying to get to, right? So how do we do that? Right. We've got a lot of really great tools out there. But again, it comes back to the machine learning and AI. How do we tie all this stuff together so that we don't really want to call them REST APIs anymore? We want to really call them push APIs, right? Let's pull this stuff together so it's a real-time threat analysis. We're going to take the information from predictive analytics and your SOAR tools and really try to bring it up to near real-time, if not real-time, in its capabilities. So that's really what I'm saying is how do we. And again, that impacts what I was saying about insider threat and advanced persistent threats. That also includes ransomware, right? So ransomware is an interesting thing that is being leveraged in a lot of different ways. And we have tools today that, we'll call them ransomware detonation. So again, the ability now to isolate patient zero, as we could say, and isolate him off right out of the gate so that, again, Denny clicks on, something around H&R Block or something, and boom, that machine's been now compromised. But now at least we can stop him at that level, beacon out the problem, and then keep him within a specific container. and leverage the tools we have from a forensics perspective, and also from a advanced threat perspective.
First of all, you get the best background of the day.
Yeah, definitely.
Trying to figure out what it was, but it looks like I thought maybe it was like something from historical, but it looks like something more modern. But I wanted to just ask.
A little more modern, yeah.
I want to remind the audience, please submit your questions. We'll get to them just in a second. But let me ask Bill one quick question and follow up, because I think there's been a theme here we've been hearing, which is about the proactive defensive cyber ops. As you heard Rick from CISA talk about earlier, and then I think each of our panelists addressed it in some way. You're tying all this real-time analysis together. You have way too much data. You need to bring in the AI and the machine learning. It seems like there's this never-ending kind of volume, velocity, veracity of data, and I'm not sure how agencies and organizations at large can really deal with it. What are some of those things you're seeing in the market, or at least in the federal sector, where agencies and or organizations are dealing with the 3 V's of data when it comes to kind of addressing that real-time challenge?
We're seeing it a couple of different ways. I mean, that there's some what we call old school kind of ways of doing it with deception, right? And I think that's coming more to the forefront now, especially when we look at even CMMC, right, levels 3 through 5. You're going to have the threat hunting and some other new types of tools. And what we're trying to bring to the table is to identify ways that if you can use deception and set out the right kind of minefield, if you will, it really does cut through the noise. Because if somebody hits something, let's say you have a deception out there that has eternal blue, right? That's going to hit the news. You guys at Jason, you're going to be reported on that agency that got hit with eternal blue, I guarantee you. So again, to be able to put out that kind of a deception with the integration of your predictive analytics, saying, okay, we know these attack paths are going to be over here. Let's throw out this minefield that has these really interesting little things that if an attacker does get in, compromises Denny's system like we did on the ransomware thing, but he's using something else, he can now go ahead and say, oh, this is really cool. Let me go over here. Now you have 100% certainty without, even with the predictive analytics. Okay, now we have something here. We've cut through the noise. We're now down to somebody, the motion detector has gone off, and now you can go ahead and go after this guy or contain it, keep him contained. I mean, that is the end game, right? We want to stop these guys. And the quicker we can stop him, post breach, whether that's a minute, 10 minutes, you don't want it 171 days like the guys up in Canada. You want to keep that post breach down to minimal.
All right,
and that's what we're seeing across the board.
My apologies. We have one question in so far, so I'll encourage everyone to kind of continue to submit. Amy writes in, and this is for everyone, I think anyone on the panel. Where do you honestly think we are in terms of ensuring that we're one step ahead of our adversaries relative to our network and information vulnerabilities? So honestly, guys, don't lie to us. Don't wishy-washy milquetoast the answer. Let me bring in Sean or Jim, because we'll put them on the spot since it's been a while since they talked. Honestly think where we are.
Yeah, so this is Sean. So I think we mentioned before about some of the delay, as you call it, with the agencies moving forward with some of the technologies. And I think part of that is because we're still learning about those new technologies, new cloud environments and what that means and what vulnerabilities are in there. So I do think that there are some agencies you see which are forward leaning. We mentioned SBA, Driggers did earlier, and some other agencies. Some other agencies are a little bit more different space on that risk tolerance spectrum. So I do agree that there's a wide range of expertise, and we do see some agencies where they're fully embracing some more modern architectures, whether it's SD-WAN or Secure Access Service Edge or Zero Trust. Then some agencies which are behind, and what we're trying to do is through TIC and through some other programs is have those agencies and those SMEs come together so they can transfer lessons learned and be available to a greater use of the federal community.
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Sean said there. There's I I guess a couple of things at play right now. One is the immediate response to the almost 100% shift to telework overnight for a lot of agencies. So there was a initial concern with keeping the business running, making sure there was enough capacity. But I think that's quickly shifted to, okay, now how do we at least make sure our access management is up to snuff, that we're using multi-factor authentication, and even if we have a device that's now maybe not a government furnished piece of equipment. So it's, I think it temporarily took the focus off of security. I mean, in deference to keeping operations going, getting enough capacity. But I think the agencies have quickly shifted back. So there's a lot of considerations there, as Sean said, with moving to the cloud. That's thrown a lot of variables into it. But I do the same. I echo what he said in terms of leveraging some successful tools and processes other agencies have put in place, and willing to share.
Larry, you want to jump in?
Sure. Actually, I'm quite encouraged. I about 7 or 8 years ago, in a different life, I was part of a team that went in and looked at what happened at OPM with the OPM breach. And of all the things that stuck with me from that experience were several of the tech team at that time saying, hey, we trust each other. That's our job. And it was really that, I don't want to say presumptuous level of trust, but it was certainly a pervasive sense of trust that kind of led to that problem. Now flash forward 7 to 8 years later, the clients I work with, no one takes anything for granted. I think they all realize at some point they're on the front line. And Sean mentioned, some agencies that are not as far ahead as others. To me, when I see that, it's almost always a function of resources. It's never a function of awareness or resolve. So I'm actually quite encouraged. We all have a long way to go. We all recognize that, but I think everyone is armed for the fight, in my experience.
I appreciate the fact, Larry, you're an optimist here. It's interesting you bring up the resources issue, and let me just pick a nit there on you for a second.
Sure.
At the beginning, I talked about $16 billion being spent on cybersecurity across the civilian side. I realize a lot of that is staff. I realize a lot of that money is in legacy IT. I realize a lot of that money is not necessarily out there to be used on new problems. Is the resource piece, from your perspective, on the people side, on the money side, a little bit of both?
I think it's a little bit of both. The one that I seem to be the most kind of alarmed by, but also encouraged by, the defenders. If I could go back to the defenders, as a rule, they are, in my experience, unbelievably motivated and enthusiastic and passionate. However, so imagine a 22, 23-year-old, junior, mid-grade enlisted person being able to leave his or her work environment, and I am not kidding, get double or triple the salary, get a significant pay raise, get a significant signing bonus, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of churn in that staff. And then the other component to it is the endless preoccupation with false alerts. You've got to chase the false alerts. And a lot of the studies I've seen, as much as 25 to 30% of an analyst's time in a given week is chasing nothing, is chasing ghosts. At some point, the most talented analyst, the most talented defender longs for something more challenging, and they move on. So I think it's the attrition caused by the mundane and the routinized that is really the threat on the resource side for staffing.
All right. I know we could go down that path. We got a bunch of questions coming in, so let me throw this out there. Bill, let me maybe bring you into this for this question. This is from Vince. What about the unknown threats? Malware can be easily manipulated, so it can easily breach. Two pieces to this. What protects from that threat? What can be done to clean up post breach? So I guess the two questions are: malware can be manipulated, unknown threats, and what protects from that threat, and what can be done post breach?
Simple question, right? So on the malware side, I mean, it's always changing. makes sense, right? I think, again, we need to look at the analytics side of things. Depending on the type of malware it is, right? Whether it's morphine, going back to Larry, the different types, it could be a script, it could be different things. We still need to be able to containerize that and, again, identify as far up front when it does, infect the machines to get it cordoned off. I mean, that really has to be the first thing. And that second question again was?
Post-breach.
Yeah, thank you.
Post-breach.
How to clean up post-breach.
Yeah, so the thing is, now you got to go back through and do the remediation, right? You've got to go back through and make sure everybody's, if you have a gold disk, everybody's got to, make sure that's all up. You got to do it, the antivirus stuff. All that has to be done, again, post-breach, just like when you go in and today with COVID, right? You got to clean the building. So same sort of thing here. A lot of those tools are already there. To kind of pivot back to what Larry was saying, though, about in your previous question, one of the things, too, I think from a gap perspective is that you got senior leadership. There's always a gap, right? And as Larry says, you got the guys down at the bottom, the E3, E6 types. They're doing the serious work. You got the guys at the top, though, that are not in the day-to-day fight. Throw into that mix all these new technologies that are coming out. There's an awareness gap. So not only do you have the resource gap, but you have the awareness gap of what kind of tools are out there. And there are some new things coming out. I know at the Air Force, it's a program called CAFE, where again, they're taking machine learning and artificial intelligence, building it into an engine now, and the seekers, being the guys at the top, the CISOs, CTOs, can say, okay, here are my big problems from a cyber perspective. How do we fix them? Or what are some recommendations? So that awareness engine now allows them to coalesce all this different technologies that are out there, vet them out, and provide maybe 3 or 4 different ways to look at this, right? So again, you got to bridge that gap, and this even plays into how do you deal with the malware? So that could be a secret question that goes in and say, okay, here are the 5 tools or resources that you could use to do that, and here's the guys that could actually do the job to help you remediate. So again, I kind of tie it all together that way. Is that going to make sense? All right.
I just want to open it up. Sean, you want to jump in on that, malware post breach? Because one of the things that we've seen time and again is the increase in the worry about unknown threats. So if you look at the FISMA report to Congress, that's one of those areas that we've seen a huge increases. Well, we know we're getting attacked, but it's either multi-vector or we're not sure by how.
Yeah, so I think one thing, if you go back to even to traditional architectures, TIC2 was, when we built out those castle and moats, it was more because that's where the attacks were going, right? It was more the attacker trying to get a vulnerability and send mail or DNS or something, or maybe trying to get the user to click on something on a website. But you'll look, like you're saying, how those attacks have shifted now. So it could be where the adversary is trying to get someone to click on something that's in a fake social networking profile, or something where they're sending like a URL through a messaging app or something, or the adversary is just trying to scan cloud accessible containers. And so those, like you're saying, those attacks are shifting to that new perimeter. And so part of TIC3 is to support those new architectures. And the key thing, and it's embedded in the tone, if you will, of the new memo, is the visibility. And so it's that visibility both to the agency and their defenders, and then to CISA, our broad mission to support and secure the .gov horizon. So that visibility is key. And you mentioned before, Jason, I didn't really answer your one question originally about CLAW, the Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse. And that's an example of how we're starting to shift our focus to be able to support those new environments. So with the Cloud Log Aggregation Warehouse called CLAW, agencies will be able to send some of their cloud telemetry to DHS, and we'll be able to start to learn about those environments. At the same time, there's obviously a heavy CDM component also. So between those 2 different visibility platforms, if you will, between CDM and NCPS, I think it'll give visibility both to us, to CISA, but ultimately also to the defenders on the agency side too.
All right, Sean, you know my follow-up's coming. You were ready for it as soon as you brought up the claw, right? What's the status of it? Is it launched? Is it close to being launched? Is it just a work in progress still? Because it goes back to that architecture piece I think you mentioned.
Sure. Yeah. So just to be clear, the clause part of the NCPS, the National Cyber Protection Services program, and I don't want to speak for them outright. They're a different program, but I could tell you what I know that they'll talk about in public. So there is the CLAW Volume 1, which is on our CISA websites, on the our TIC webpage, which talks about in a general form how the different cloud providers that we can start to have that telemetry, those APIs and different types of feeds come into DHS to CISA. And really itself, to answer your question directly, right now we're in a piloting phase. We're working with some agencies, learning about their environments. The CLAW documentation is a separate volume. So the TIC documents are volume 1, volume 2, volume 3. CLAW is also its own separate. So the CLAW that was released, the reference architecture release, was volume 1. So to answer your question, there's also a newer a volume 2 coming out at some point. I think they're pre-positioning that to be ready. So there'll be volume 1, which gives us some of the general principles for CLAW, and then volume 2, which I think is going to be more focused on some of the feeds themselves and what the NCPS and the analysts will be looking for. So stay tuned. There's a lot to come out, not only on the TIC side, but on the CLAW and the NCPS side as well.
Okay, thank you for that. A couple other questions that have popped up. Mike writes in, this conversation is primarily on IT related topics. Where and how does the IoT and the ICS, industrial control systems, threat planes, how are they being included for equal importance? So I guess the question here is enough about IT, but what about these other attack surfaces, if you will, IoT, industrial control systems? I'll just open that up to anyone on the panel.
So I could speak real quick from TIC. I think that's a great question. Internet of Things. We've heard about agencies. How do we protect IoT? And so that is one of the use cases that's on our horizon about having an Internet of Things use case to work with agencies. There's a lot of agencies that have sensors all over the place in terms of, it could be something monitoring farms, or it could be something monitoring something out in the ocean, or all sorts of different areas. And so we want to work with as agencies to learn what they're doing, how they're securing those devices, how they're having that telemetry come back into their environments. And then again, as a typical use case, distill those lessons learned from those different pilots, if you will, and build that into a use case itself.
Jim, do you want to, is through EIS and other things you're doing at GSA, has the industrial control systems, has building systems, has that come up? I mean, we know PBS, big landlord, but I didn't know if that has come up in your world yet.
Tangentially, it has. I hesitate to say that we've done a lot in that space, so I don't want to waste time with a very fluffy answer there. But
no worries.
It's definitely something coming, and as Sean said, it's on the list of things to do when it comes to use cases.
But Larry is shaking his head. So Larry, did you want to jump in?
Well, I'll add that if we go back to the idea of machine learning, and more importantly, giving the advantage to the defender, that telemetry can be structured. It does have a representative, or the potential for representative trainer dating sets. It's pretty simplistic traffic, relatively speaking, but because it can be structured, because the structure can lead to a detailed feature space, machine learning can most certainly be employed to give the defender an advantage in an IoT environment. That's a great question. We almost always focus on IT. I think it's because of a daily problem for all of us, but I could assert that in many ways, the threat to the ICS and the infrastructure of our company is a more compelling threat.
And Bill?
So, yeah, so the only thing I would add to that is going back to my earlier comments around physical and logical security.
Yeah.
Again, there's active threat deception that creates new deceptions around the IoT type devices and SCADA systems. So there are actually ways to address some of those. Obviously, it's not going to be the end all, but again, there are ways to skin that cat, so to speak.
All right, got another question from Crystal. She writes, if social distancing measures stay enacted for an extended period of time, will this help or hurt endeavors to protect our infrastructure? And does working in the office versus working from home affect our ability to protect information and systems? So I think what Crystal's getting to here is, the current situation we're all in, if this extends for a longer period of time, what does that do to our abilities? I don't know if Bill or Larry, you want to jump in here to start us off?
Yeah, let me take that one first. I live with my mother-in-law. I need to get back to my office, please. In all seriousness,
She's not listening, is she?
no, but she'll find out. She'll find out. Believe me. In all seriousness, the COVID is both a blessing and a curse, because it's challenged all of us to say, hey, how secure are the things we use at home? Almost every professional at some level works on email at home, necessary email. And I think that presents a whole series of problems around, hey, is your cell phone protected? Is your laptop protected? In the age of COVID, almost everyone was caught flat-footed because these things weren't sanctioned and they weren't standardized. I do think going forward, it just gives, especially in the age of COVID, it gives the mission way too much flexibility on how their staff is managed, on how the staff self-manages itself. I think at some level, teleworking is here to stay for all of us. And I think it's necessary to make sure we're locking down the endpoints of technologies that we're not otherwise accounted for.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and sort of echo that in terms of this, the explosion in working from home has really, given a kickstart to the agencies in looking seriously at their access management. And, that's all part of what they'd have to consider for a tick update, a tick solution. So it's really shoved that to the forefront. As I said, after, the initial, hey, we have to keep the lights on, we have to keep operating, we need capacity. I think now, this has really put the spotlight on, we really have to work on access management and, getting to upgrading our tick, if you will, solution sets sooner instead of later.
So I think the way to extend that out is, we talk about the agencies themselves, but also too, we need to look at the contractors, right? The impact that the DIB is going to have on this, right? You've got a lot of guys out there that have access. They're dual hatted. They've got their actual, SI email, and they have their .gov or .mil email. So again, now we extended the reach on how that's going to look, and also to how do you maintain and manage those dual hatted environments without making that kill zone even bigger. And again, it also depends too on the size, right? So smaller companies, I don't think are impacted as much, but the larger SIs and the guys in that environment, I think are much more impacted.
I think the kill zone you talk about is huge. The attack surface. One of the things, I just had a conversation with Brian Ware, who's I think Sean may know him a little bit, and he talked about the biggest changes that they've seen over the last few months is that bigger zone, that bigger challenge of attack surface. And I think that this question that from Crystal and others hit upon. Let me go back. I got another question from Ben, and this is specifically for Sean. So Sean, pick your ears up. Under TIC 3.0, agencies can assign security zones of varying degrees of trust from high to low. How does this lead to zero trust and fit into the concept? So we're talking about security zones and lead into zero trust.
Yeah, sure. So we heard a lot of questions. I mentioned RFC window. There's a lot of questions about the trust zones themselves. So one thing that I think will be better clarified when we release the final draft is that high to low, that's just a gradient that CISA uses to explain our concepts and the architectures. The agencies themselves can have various different gradients. We've talked to one agency where they're going to have like 10 different variants of the gradient. So the high to low is just what we use and internal to our documentation to explain it. But to get to the greater question, like you mentioned about zero trust. So we talk to agencies that are still very much toward that traditional TIC architecture, that TIC 2. So that trust zone is very large for them. They have the external zone, which is totally untrusted, if you will, and then the internal zone, the trusted. But then you start to work toward micro-segmentation and toward zero trust in the end. Those trust zones will start to shrink down. That attack footprint will start to shrink down too. And that's what we're trying to go to. I mentioned before that I'm also one of the co-authors of the NIST Special Pub. and on zero trust. And in there, it talked about trusted resource as trusted application. So that trust zone concept from TIC can then be applied to that trusted resource in the zero trust special put. And so we're trying to shrink that trust zone down. Before, where it was possibly the full network, it can be smaller toward a container or an endpoint or a system. Ideally, trying to shrink that down as small as possible. And that's what we're trying to articulate to agencies, where in the program, we need to give them the flexibility to decide their trust zone, the size of their trust zones. But in the end, and as as it comes out in zero trust itself is, in the end, you do need to trust something, whether it's the app, the user, the data. And that's what we're trying to define by those trust zones is what is the valuable assets? What is the agency trying to protect? And then put the appropriate security controls around that asset.
All right, we are pushing up right at 10 o'clock. I know our next panelist is there, or our next speaker is there. So let me turn it back over to Denny. But first, let me thank Sean, Larry, Jim, and Bill. You guys are great. I really enjoyed the panel, and you guys did a nice job all around. And I know we could have talked longer, but I want to keep our next keynote waiting. So Denny, back over to you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Denny's on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well done, Jason, and you're a great moderator, despite what I said earlier. And the panelists, I call them the Fab Four. It's an old basketball term from Michigan, and I'm telling you, it was a great panel and led by a great moderator. So thank you all very, very much. So not to keep us waiting any longer, I'm excited to have the privilege to talk about our next keynote speaker, Nick Anderson, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Security and Energy Restoration, Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response, CESER, Department of Energy, and what a title, that's impressive. Mr. Anderson brings a wealth of experience from the Office of Management and Budget as the Senior Cybersecurity Advisor to the Federal CIO. No small task. Earlier in his career, he served as Chief Information Officer for the state of Vermont and held leadership roles at Navy Intelligence and the U.S. Coast Guard. He served active duty with the U.S. Marine Corps, managing intelligence mission systems in Iraq, Europe, and Africa. Now, join us for a virtual clap for our keynote speaker, Nick Anderson.
Thank you very much, Denny. I appreciate it. The title's long, but I don't know if it's actually impressive. There's a distinction there. Thank you very much for the intro, and thank you for having me here today. I'm only sad for everybody that I have to follow someone as knowledgeable and impressive as Sean Connolly there at the very end. When I was over there at OMB in my last role, Sean was always one of our great partners, and we appreciate everything he's done for the federal community. So let me talk to you a little bit about the Department of Energy today and the work that we're doing to secure the nation's energy infrastructure. So as Denny said, I'm Nick Anderson. I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Security and Energy Restoration in our CESER office, Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. But CESER is a little bit less of a mouthful. On behalf of the departments, CESER's mission is really maintaining a few different elements of our operational responsibilities, from maintaining that unique sector-wide situational awareness, discovering and mitigating vulnerabilities to cyber threats, orchestrating response and recovery operations through capacity building, partnerships, research, and info sharing to help safeguard against all hazards to protect our nation's energy system. And that all hazards part is really important. When we look at one of the apex of our critical infrastructure sectors in energy and the dependencies that all other critical infrastructure sectors have on it, we have to safeguard against all threats. Whether that's pandemic response operations or cyber threats. And while that mission may sound complex, the purpose of it really is not. It's all about ensuring the reliable flow of energy across the nation, or energy security. And it's critical for just a number of reasons. Not only is it essential to our way of life, but to the economic and national security of our nation. As we like to say, energy security is in fact national security. And when you consider how many of those other critical sectors depend on energy, it's easy to see why. A widespread disruption within our energy infrastructure could affect hospitals, water, transportation, emergency services, the financial sector, government operations, and telecommunications in a way that could temporarily cripple our ability to protect the homeland. And we spent a lot of time talking about elements that were really critical in COVID-19 response. Things like ventilators, access to emergency medical personnel, and the types of technology they've come to rely on to provide those essential services. But really, without our ability to ensure the continuous delivery of power, there are significant impacts to that sector being able to deliver those critical lifeline services to citizens. So our work is not really on just securing conventional electric infrastructure, but it also increasingly has a prevalent focus on renewable energy systems, as well as the infrastructure that supports the production, transmission, and distribution of natural gas and liquid fuels, things like gasoline, jet fuel, propane, propane and heating oil as well. So today, I'd like to take an opportunity to kind of introduce you to the ongoing activities of the office in pursuit of that mission. Towards the end, I'll try to cover a little bit more briefly about our efforts specifically to secure the nation's energy infrastructure during COVID-19 response, as an example of how we try to remain agile and adapting our mission space to the rapidly changing global threat landscape. Before maybe we take some questions from Denny, and if we can, the audience. And so to kind of give you a 101 view of sector-specific responsibilities, CSER exercises what's called the sector-specific agency responsibilities of the Department of Energy. So DOE is charged with securing our nation's energy infrastructure against, again, not just those cyber threats, but all threats and hazards: cyber, physical, natural, and man-made. So before we jump into the cyber realm, I want to briefly describe some of the roles that we play for the department in emergency preparedness, response, and recovery. CSER leads those efforts in securing our energy infrastructure against those hazards, and we execute what's called the ESF 12 responsibility, or the Emergency Support Function 12 responsibilities under the National Response Framework. The National Response Framework is our nation's scalable, flexible framework for aligning key roles and responsibilities for a whole of nation style of support across all types of disasters and emergencies. Those emergency support functions line up with specific departments and agencies that lead them, normally integrated and led by a federal lead, such as FEMA or HHS, as we've recently seen, but also those ESF annexes within that response framework also supply a common framework for collaborating with state, local, tribal, and territorial partners as well, where they likewise build up an analogous capability for emergency support frameworks within their state and local governments. So from a preparedness perspective, CSER participates in, sponsors, and supports a number of exercises to help bring together this exact type of community that federal, state, local, tribal, territorial partners from oil and natural gas and electricity subsectors for senior level policy discussions and more operationally focused tactical engagement. We use the results of those exercises to inform our response plans and to close identified gaps in coordination with those industry and government partners. So where our cybersecurity mission really is a little bit different from what maybe traditionally someone like me, who's been a CIO in a few different roles, the difference for us is we really have to focus on the external responsibilities and the collaboration with these critical infrastructure owner operators, because they're the ones that have that stake in the ground. And they're the ones that are responsible for this infrastructure overall. So we fulfill the federal government's duties and responsibilities in that way to help mitigate emergency incidents on energy systems and provide that sector-specific guidance. We do that through providing technical expertise to industry, to other partner agencies, to those localized governments, and conducting field assessments as we need to. Sometimes that involves sending in catastrophic incident response teams to assess with things like damage assessments after an earthquake. Sometimes it's just serving as that critical cog on the federal side that can really help to explain to someone on the ground what we can do to try to support them with contacting our fellow responders within the federal family to try to articulate perhaps a need for regulatory relief or to identify elements where additional support is needed. So we also evaluate and share information regarding the impacts on those energy systems, estimating the effects of outages within affected areas, assessing potential state, regional, and national impacts. And we provide that as a service both to the industry community, to those stakeholders in the state and local side, as well as to other federal family members. That really helps us to assist and overcome the challenges associated with restoration of the energy system, where we're not jumping in there to prioritize the restoration of the energy system. A lot of times we're not the ones hands-on getting in there to do that work, but we're really able to serve as a facilitator within that mutual aid and mutual assistance program that supports restoration efforts irrespective of the hazard or the threat. So our response team really has done it all. That's everything from wildfires and earthquakes to hurricanes and typhoons. Just in the last several months, we've dealt with everything from trying to support, Puerto Rico in response in those efforts with their recent earthquakes in January, to COVID-19 response, to cyber threats emanating from geopolitical tensions, as well as just cyber criminals and those who are looking to take advantage of the new normal and the new extended attack surface that we have. So when we have a potential threat that's identified, DOE dispatches our responders to threatened regions to help those industry and local government counterparts identify issues that might distress safe and efficient restoration, hold pre-disaster calls to make sure that state and industry partners get an opportunity to identify those issues that may require federal support. And we also just want to make sure everybody's speaking the same language. New energy restoration efforts look very different now in a COVID-19 environment than what they did pre-COVID. Some of that might mean that additional steps need to be taken to reduce crew size, to allow for appropriate social distancing that may affect restoration efforts and restoration times. We want to make sure that's clearly articulated upfront so we can kind of help to manage expectations in some of those coordination calls. Once that's completed, we do issue daily situational reports to provide that real-time analysis of the event's impacts and provide that to everyone from the National Security Council down to any local member of government who may need them to help fulfill their responsibilities. Post that disaster, our deployed responders provide on-the-ground expertise for restoring those energy systems full capacity, while DOE leadership holds daily calls with affected members of the sector and those federal response partners to ensure that unity of effort. So while our preparedness, recovery, and response roles take that all hazards approach, a cyber incident has never to date threatened widespread outage here in the United States. But we at CSER consider cyber in our preparedness exercises and while we're examining our response plans to make sure we have appropriately covered the cyber element and to make sure we're taking opportunities to partner with our industry and intergovernmental partners to plan for those types of contingencies. A great example of this was in 2018, our iteration of our Liberty Eclipse exercise series, which focused on increasing the country's ability to mitigate adversary cyber degradation of the grid's restoration capability. We kind of took that in multiple phases. The first of which was simply a tabletop exercise focusing on the roles and responsibilities and the various authorities that are at play with federal, state, and energy industry partners in response to a significant cyber attack on energy infrastructure. But then phase 2 moved into a 7-day operations-based exercise conducted on Plum Island in New York. So during phase 2, we were able to work with DARPA and quite a few US utilities to test and evaluate tools and capabilities that could help to enable the recovery of the power grid during a cyber attack. We took those experiments as an opportunity to hold them in an isolated and controlled environment with first responders and power engineers on hand, because we really wanted to ensure some of that private sector collaboration and be able to use that private sector element to better inform DARPA's research results, which were directly transitioned to industry and translated into greater preparedness from potential cyber attack. So not only do we host and participate in those cyber-centric exercises, but we also consider cyber as an element within our traditional exercise series, examining what might happen should a natural disaster majorly affect cyber infrastructure used in the grid, should it affect telecommunications infrastructure, or if an adversary has attempted to take advantage of a natural disaster to breach a system while our attention was focused elsewhere. So from a response perspective, we're also taking a good hard look at how cybersecurity can fit into the incident command system, which is the government's overall sort of management system for enabling effective and efficient domestic incident management. It integrates kind of the facilities, the equipment, the personnel, the procedures, and the communications that are being used within a common organizational structure, so that we've taken that as an opportunity to learn the lessons of the past and to make sure that we have that in place, we've exercised it appropriately ahead of time. So on the cyber side, it's clearly present in the preparedness aspect of our mission, and it's really a hallmark of how CSER uses our ability to actively address the cyber threats of today and prepare the energy sector for the threats of tomorrow. As we've mentioned here today, the cyber world has fundamentally changed how we as a nation must approach national security. We must now defend against threats, not just at our doorstep, but within the cyber infrastructure across all the segments of critical infrastructure within the homeland. Furthermore, private companies have really been pulled directly into this fray. As I previously mentioned, with our significant collaboration with private sector, critical infrastructure owner operators, we are critically dependent on that partnership, but we're critically dependent on our ability to work and collaborate together, because 85% of that energy infrastructure in the United States is owned and operated by the private sector. Now, it's been publicly stated by the intelligence community that China and Russia already possess the ability to temporarily disrupt critical energy infrastructure here within the United States. And today, our adversaries are continuing to map our critical energy assets with the goal of gaining the ability to cause substantial damage. The energy sector really is in the crosshairs of advanced, persistent nation-state actors. For those adversaries, no price is too high to be able to hold our critical infrastructure hostage, and the energy sector needs to partner to provide critical infrastructure owner-operators with the intelligence, resources, and guidance at the caliber needed to face these grave threats. And this is really where CSER comes in on its core cyber mission. For our cyber activities, we align our priorities with the administration's national cyber strategy. Now, likewise, the national security strategy demands that the United States rethink the policies of the past 2 decades, policies based on the assumption that engagement with rivals and their inclusion in international institutions and global commerce can turn them into benign actors and trustworthy partners. For the most part, I don't know that we've seen this to be true. Rival actors continue to use propaganda and other means to try to discredit democracy and discredit the efforts of the US government. They advance a lot of times anti-Western views and spread false information to create divisions amongst ourselves and those that we need to ally with and those that we need to partner with. In particular, in the 2018 findings of an investigation into China's acts, policies, and practices related to technology transfer, intellectual property, the United States Trade Rep determined that numerous acts, policies, and practices of the PRC government were unreasonable or discriminatory. They placed a burden to try to restrict United States commerce. Based on that investigation, the Trade Rep found that the People's Republic of China requires or pressures US companies and their transfer of technology to Chinese entities. It places substantial restrictions on US companies' ability to license their technology on actual market terms. It's directly and unfairly facilitating the acquisition of US companies and assets by domestic firms to obtain kind of cutting edge technology and to get ahead of that curve. And it's conducting and supporting unauthorized cyber intrusions into US companies' networks to access sensitive information and trade secrets. So as we outlined recently in the US strategic approach to the People's Republic of China, PRC attempts to dominate that global information and communications technology industry through those unfair practices has resulted in discriminatory regulations like the PRC National Security Law, the National Cybersecurity Law, which requires companies to comply with Chinese data localization measures that enable the Chinese Communist Party access to foreign data. Other PRC laws, which we've probably heard lots about, in particular within this industry, that compel companies like Huawei and ZTE to cooperate with Chinese security services, even when they do business abroad. That creates security vulnerabilities for foreign countries and enterprises using Chinese vendors, equipment, and services. With direction from the National Cyber Strategy, DOE works extensively with our interagency partners to help clarify those roles and responsibilities of federal departments and agencies and the expectations for the private sector related to cybersecurity risk management and how we support the incident response process overall. CSER's core cyber capabilities are informed by DOE's multi-year plan for energy sector cybersecurity, which is a publicly available document right there on the energy.gov page. This was released a little more than 2 years ago in March of 2018, and the plan really has three goals: strengthening energy sector cybersecurity preparedness, coordinating cyber incident response and recovery, and accelerating the research, development, and demonstration of resilient energy delivery systems, especially through our work with universities, private sector partners, and the national labs. Now, CSER's R&D division is responsible for the last of these three, and investing in tools and technologies to help the sector prevent, detect, mitigate, and survive cyber incidents. By co-funding industry, national lab, and university-led projects with government and industry partners, it gives us an opportunity to make a lot of strides in advancing the cybersecurity capabilities of energy delivery systems. This includes not only game-changing commercial products to enhance energy infrastructure survivability and resilience, which is of critical importance, but it's also $70 million annually invested in programs and platforms for information sharing, intelligence-informed analysis, and the assessment of system components. A couple of these programs include things like our C2M2 model, our cybersecurity capability maturity model, which is our NIST-aligned cybersecurity assessment model for use within energy companies, and a couple of our trade association partners have used this within their utility space as a type of scorecard and an ability for people to assess their cyber maturity. The development and deployment of technologies and programs is also included within this scope to really enhance the speed and effectiveness of threat and vulnerability information sharing, such as our CAT and Coyote programs, both among the industry as well as the federal government to industry information sharing. We also have a national cyber supply chain vulnerability assessment program for developing a collaborative understanding of systemic risk, and that's our Citrix program, our cyber testing for resilient industrial control systems program. And really, that clearly aligns the administration's priority of securing our nation from adversaries, creating and exploiting vulnerabilities in bulk power system technology. And that's a near whole of DOE complex efforts, both multiple offices here at our headquarters, as well as multiple national labs across our lab complex. We've also recently initiated an Energy Sector Pathfinder program, which is intended to help advance threat information sharing, improve training and education to understand those systemic risks, and then develop joint operational preparedness and response activities in partnership with the people like the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security, CISA, with people like Dad Driggers, who you heard from earlier from his team. Along with those preparedness and response roles that we have, the division that I most closely work with here is our infrastructure security and energy restoration element, which is primarily focused on those first two of the MYP goals. Strengthening energy sector cybersecurity preparedness and coordinating cyber incident response and recovery. A key focus of our work in securing the nation's energy infrastructure is that collaboration and cooperation directly with the private sector and our interagency partners, of which information sharing is the cornerstone, if not one of the most critical parts. In strengthening our cyber awareness and preparedness specifically, we actively use those government to industry platforms developed through our R&D division to securely share threat information. Now, across those platforms, this includes vulnerabilities found in the wild, as well as threat information unique to the intelligence of the federal government. So while sharing that information is important, our collaboration with the industry really doesn't stop there. Primarily through our SCCs, or our subsector coordinating councils. We have both the electricity subsector coordinating council, as well as the oil and natural gas subsector coordinating councils. And we use these as unique opportunities for us to engage directly with these industry leaders to provide a dependable bridge to those real world concerns facing the industry, and also to help build the tools that benefits the entire energy sector, including many of those that I've described. It also gives a really terrific opportunity for direct feedback concerning industry perspectives on the implementation of policy. Specifically, I think a unique example of this was recently in the bulk power system executive order issued by President Trump. Both the oil and natural gas and the electricity subsector coordinating councils are specifically called out in the EO as elements of collaboration in the task force approach that the Secretary of Energy will be taking to implement that executive order. That level of direct collaboration with those subsector coordinating councils really kind of speaks to the long-term partnership that the Department of Energy has kind of brought to bear within that space. So finally, in our work with those private sector owner operators, I mentioned it a couple of times, but our association and our linkage with state, local, tribal, and territorial partners as well cannot at all be overemphasized. So my division works directly with national associations as well that represent those areas to make sure they have the tools and resources needed to support energy security at these levels. That's everything from collaborating with them on outreach and engagement to actually funding tool and technology development that will directly support their mission needs. So before taking questions, I would like to cover a little bit about CSER's role here at DOE throughout its response to the pandemic for COVID-19, which I feel really is a great example of CSER's ability to adapt to uncertainty and press on supporting the sector irrespective of the threat and its nexus. A key pillar of the federal government's COVID-19 response has been assuring the continued functioning of the 16 sectors critical to maintaining our economy and national security. For us in CSER, this means the pandemic has brought us to all hands on deck. Fulfilling that sector-specific agency role for DOE, CSER has been primarily responsible for the department's obligations to support the sector during this crisis, a sector that truthfully went above and beyond to ensure that continuous energy delivery to its neighbors. This was everything from planning really rigorously, to be completely honest, with our both of our SCCs with either responsible return compendiums or their preparedness compendiums that they put together. Both of the SCCs really just went above and beyond, and our industry partners truthfully showed some real dedication to the mission and taking really extensive steps to do everything up to and including sequestering their staff in place at utilities for sometimes weeks at a time, to live there on site to ensure that they would reduce the opportunity for infection and transmission within those critical areas like control room operators that are really controlling the heart of operations for the grid. And those were people that were volunteering across the board with those utilities, with those oil and natural gas companies to ensure that the continuous flow of electrons and oil and natural gas to support all those elements of our response operations. So it provided us a terrific opportunity in our work to partner with people like Rick over at CISA and to communicate closely with energy system operators and governors nationwide about the importance of the energy sector's enabling role for those other critical infrastructures and offering our support to do things like securing PPE and testing where needed. As we've supported the health and the safety of the nation's energy sector workforce, we've also been intimately involved in assisting the energy sector to maintain heightened cybersecurity awareness during this time. For those who followed the news in this space, you know that those bad actors all over the world have redoubled their efforts and their resolve to intrude into critical systems to advance their financial or geopolitical interests during the pandemic. While this is a concerning focus, in a couple of different ways, the energy sector in particular has been an attractive target as nation state adversaries look to take advantage of the crisis to attempt to gain a foothold in critical systems with international reports of cyber intrusion attempts on energy systems have been issued from Taiwan to the UK to the Middle East and elsewhere during the pandemic. I'm pleased to say that during COVID-19, there's been no disruption to or known intrusion in energy systems in the United States. And as we move into hurricane season, we've updated our response plans that are in place, following FEMA guidance and working with our interagency partners to make sure that we're applying all of the lessons learned of this to adapt our emergency operations to those realities and the risk of coronavirus to prioritize the health and safety of responders. Under that incident command system, CESAR is continuing to work today with those private sector partners as well as the interagency to closely monitor any threats that we see to the nation's energy system. And we offer that continuous engagement and guidance both for our public COVID sector focused FAQs and directly through our information sharing programs. So in closing, I'd like to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to share so much about CESAR with you. I know it's a lot. It's a very broad mission space that we take on here, and it's one that provides us with a terrific opportunity to partner with other critical members of other sectors. While COVID has brought us further from one another physically, there is a silver lining of being able to share our work with such a broad array of stakeholders through the virtual environment. So I want to thank ITPA for providing me the forum to do that today. And for those in the private sector, I hope I've given you a little bit of confidence, not only in the government's ability to navigate that ever transforming cyber landscape, but in the value of the public-private partnerships that we pursue to improve the national and economic security of the nation. And for our public sector members of the audience, considering how your agency's expertise connects to the challenges of survivable, reliable, resilient energy infrastructure, please don't hesitate, anybody across the board, to engage us. Our line is always open, and I'm happy to take questions with the time that we've got remaining. Thank you. Denny, it looks like you're talking, but I think you're on mute again.
Can you hear me now?
Yep, sure
Okay,
can. Well, I could. No, I can't.
Are we good?
I can hear you.
Okay, I'll keep this fast. Just an amazing perspective and insight into all your activities and responsibilities at DOE, and it's just very, very impressive. And I want to thank you from ITPA's perspective, as well as Dr. Gupta's perspective, in terms of the great words you've shared with us today and the great concepts. And it's amazing to me, you know, you always try to read up on what you're going to be discussing and the panel you're going to be dealing with, but it's the amount of information I didn't know versus what you shared with me is stunning, and I really appreciate that. You triggered a lot of thoughts from the audience. If I could ask a couple of questions as these things come in, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, the first one kind of interesting, so I'll go with this first. CESAR is furthering DOE's long history of investing in R&D by industry and the national labs of the next generation of advanced technologies. Can you share some insights from a future perspective as to what some of these might be?
Sure, absolutely. So, we're investing in quite a few different spaces. One of which was a recent award, which you can read about on the DOE website, called CyMani, which is our cyber secure advanced manufacturing initiative in collaboration with UTSA. So that's another opportunity where we're partnering with the EERE office. It's our Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Office to really look at advanced manufacturing concepts in a cyber secure way. So that's one element where we look at support for advanced manufacturing, support for cybersecure practices that'll support that. We're also engaging in quite a few elements of supply chain illumination and supply chain research, kind of extending our ability to provide insights into the extended supply chain and the risk that's associated with it for the nation's energy infrastructure. So we have quite a few projects focused in that area, as well as enabling private sector owner operators to be able to gain more insights, to be able to collaborate more clearly and derive value from the data that they have at their fingertips, whether that's in some of our direct funding opportunities that we've recently provided, where we've tried to focus some of our efforts on directly applying those resources to small and medium-sized utilities, to those that may be more resource constrained and don't necessarily have the opportunity to invest in the way that some of the larger utility players may. We also have a couple of oil and natural gas pilots going on to be able to focus on the specific types of threat and information that can be derived through partnership with our oil and natural gas partners. It's just a handful of the projects that we have going on right now.
Very good answer, and thank you. Another good question from a government colleague. From your perspective, what are your top 3 challenges from a cyber threat perspective?
Sure, I'd say recent history with all things related to COVID has really highlighted kind of the tenuousness associated with the extension of the attack surface. So making sure that we all have an appropriate understanding of the extension of the attack surface and really what that means for good cyber hygiene and good planning to understand all of the elements associated with appropriate segmentation and management of our networks and assets. I think that's one. The appropriate illumination of the supply chain is certainly another for us, and this is kind of highlighted within that bulk power system executive order, being able to provide the level of insight that's really necessary for the deep level of insight that we need, and really we need to work in partnership with the manufacturing sector as well as critical infrastructure owner operators. That'd be number 2. And then number 3 is just sort of exercising our ability to appropriately respond. A lot of elements here that we look at are elements that haven't necessarily been examined before, and a lot of them are all critical cross dependencies that may not normally be highlighted in a traditional situation. I think a good example is very recently in Michigan, there was a story that broke about a small earthen mound dam that burst, and and it really affected that associated community and the surrounding area. But aside from the direct human impact associated with that dam and its operations, which truthfully, from a generation perspective, it wasn't a significant amount of energy. But when you look at all of the other associated impacts across sector, there was a large chemical manufacturer footprint there also in the immediate area. There's of course just the tangible impact on people, their safety, their livelihood, their homes, and there's also all of the other cross-sector impacts that we look at.
Super.
Yeah.
Great answer. From another government colleague, discuss CSOR's workforce development initiatives.
Okay, sure thing. So one of them that's really I'd like to highlight would be our Cyberforce competition. Our Cyberforce competition is held annually, and that's done in conjunction with our national labs, and it provides an opportunity for collegiate level participants to engage in a cybersecurity competition focused on energy sector and in particular control system based assets. We try to look at that both as an opportunity to stress the importance of the energy sector mission and cybersecurity elements associated with that, but as well as it being a longer term workforce development effort where we look at the president's initiatives regarding the cybersecurity workforce and some of the cyber physical systems nexus that we see there. We also just very recently kicked off. You can probably still see it on our recent press releases on our website. Service Academy collaboration this year. It's the first round is with the Coast Guard Academy, and they're going to be we're going to have some cadets from the Coast Guard Academy serving as interns with us virtually, of course, this summer in partnership with Idaho National Labs to support some of our CSER programs. And we've got quite a few other workforce development programs, whether it's kind of exercise development or direct attribution of technology and information to our energy sector colleagues to help them to build up their workforce as well.
Great answer. Thank you. Another question that came in, and I think you touched on this earlier, but if you could elaborate, what is CSER's role in preparing for and responding to disaster energy delivery?
Sure thing. So DOE and CSER specifically leads ESF 12. So if you look at the National Response Framework, ESF 12 is the annex that specifically covers all things energy. So DOE is the lead federal agency for ESF 12. That means for us, whether it's in conversations with FEMA and it's us staffing the National Response Coordination Center, or it's collaboration with our state, local, tribal, territorial partners, or is that very strong collaboration that we have with our industry colleagues during that time. We're leading all of those coordination, information sharing mechanisms during response for how something may affect the energy system. And sometimes that's just providing information to people that are trying to understand kind of the interdependencies of impacts associated with response operations. When you have something like a hurricane come in, you have to move a lot of people very quickly, both into and out of an area, and you have to move a lot of logistics and supplies associated with them, and you have to try to pre-stage as many things as you can within the local area where they may not be affected. So some things that we provide are both the information and the insights. We also have specific models that we've worked on in collaboration with our national lab colleagues, like our head out model, to try to be able to provide that breakout county by county of predictive analysis of the impacts of outages on a county by county level, to provide insights for where are we potentially going to see the most impact based on storm track and weather information, but B, where's the opportunity for pre-staging of assets and logistics to be able to support response operations.
Excellent. Great detailed response, and we appreciate that. Another question here, can you address the energy threats of tomorrow or some of the bad actors that we need to be aware of? I think you touched on that in some of your speech, but if you could just highlight some of those. Energy threats of tomorrow and bad actors that we need to be concerned with.
Sure thing. So I think energy threats of tomorrow. We have the threat today that we still need to be prepared to respond to. But the risk of nation state actors is one that can't be overstated. But just the risk, truthfully, of poor business practices that have resulted in kind of a lackadaisical approach to sometimes engineering out risk associated with what are the real crown jewels, what are the real high consequence assets within some of our areas. Some organizations, it's absolutely fantastic. Largely within the community, people have taken a real consequence-driven approach, or they're starting to, associated with engineering out their cyber risk. But in some places, it's not the case, whether because of legacy management issues, resource issues, or just knowledge issues associated with the real risk. So energy security threats of tomorrow, I think for us, we're also investing, we kind of have an all of the above energy strategy within the United States. So we're trying to, as new means come available for energy sources that will enable some of that delivery, we're trying to very quickly partner with our energy focused applied offices within the Department of Energy to make sure that we're engaging in research and vulnerability assessment associated with those new technologies that will support energy delivery in the future.
Excellent. Thank you for a detailed response and meaningful thoughts on the future. Last question, actually two more. One is, what are the most important roles that CSER plays in cybersecurity? What's your top 2 or top 3?
Sure. So for us, I think it's two pieces. It is, our direct linkage between the government with the energy sector. Make sure we're providing context. Make sure we're providing indicators and warnings, to them that can help them to better refine and better focus their operations. They don't have infinite resources, and they don't have infinite time. Being able to work with them as a partner to highlight those critical areas of focus for them, and to be able to help provide larger context for them, I think is critically important. And then I think also being able to represent that perspective and be able to represent critical infrastructure owner operators perspective inside the government space, and being able to represent kind of the intricacies associated with that very interconnected system is something that we take very seriously. We within all the critical infrastructure sectors, there's an element of mystery versus kind of general cybersecurity knowledge, and we take it very seriously to serve as an ambassador inside and outside of the government to be able to represent those specific needs, and to be able to kind of work with our partners in an intergovernmental way to be able to link up those cross-sector impacts, so we can all sort of benefit from the information sharing and knowledge that we gain.
Makes great sense. And you're close to the finish line. One last question to close her out, if you would, for me. What are the key takeaways you'd like to share with this government industry audience so that we could assist you with your mission?
Sure. Well, I think point one is, the door is always open for us. Collaboration and partnership is really at the heart of everything that CSER takes on. Our outreach and integration mechanisms are critically important to us and to our mission. So I think that would be point one. I think point two would be, as someone who is responsible for any segment of technology service delivery, I think it's really important that we take the wider view of risk and the wider view of critical dependency on other sectors. There's sort of a niche community that, until a disaster happens, isn't really sometimes well invested in. That's like business continuity and disaster recovery. For us, we want to be able to stress to people how critically integrated their operations are and how dependent they are on secure, reliable energy delivery, and be able to have those conversations with them upfront, and to be able to make sure that we take the broader lessons that we can learn from operational technology and industrial control systems applied within the energy sector, and make sure that we can share that information much more broadly. There was a wide set of vulnerabilities very recently released called Ripple 20, which included 19 vulnerabilities specific to TREC systems. That's a terrific example of how this software and this vulnerability within their TCP/IP stack started being integrated into systems well over 20 years ago. That kind of being baked into manufacturer systems, their operational technology, where we're investing in this infrastructure for decades at a time. It's not necessarily something that would be on a traditional IT tech refresh cycle, or maybe hopefully every 3 to 5 years. Those types of vulnerabilities and investments that we can make today in critical infrastructure are going to pay dividends for decades down the road.
Well, I want to thank you again from Electrosoft's perspective and from ITPA's perspective. You did your department well today by all the knowledge you've provided us with, and the perspective, which is so critically important to understand how we can help you, and in turn you help us. So I just want to say thanks again, and great job.
Well, thank you to ITPA and to Electrosoft for putting on this event. We appreciate the opportunity to engage collaboratively, and we appreciate the opportunity to share our message and our mission with such a wide group of stakeholders.
Greatly appreciated. Okay, let me move on then, and you have a virtual round of applause. And again, our thanks. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and thank all of our guests today for this kind of an amazing landscape and long, diverse discussion today, which I think is very meaningful. So in that regard, let me invite Dr. Gupta to offer some closing comments and remarks as our co-host today.
Oh, well, thank you, Denny. Yes, like you said, on behalf of Electrosoft as well, I would really like to thank Rick Driggers, Nick Anderson, our distinguished panelists, and our expert moderator, Jason Miller. And also appreciation to our media friends for supporting today's event, of course. And if you want to move to the next slide, I think I'd like to recognize our corporate sponsors, Calvio Federal, Blue Vector Comcast, CommScope, SignaCom Solutions, and Foxhole Technology. And finally, an applause to the great ITPA organization and to their spirit of collaboration. We couldn't have put this event together without your help.
Greatly appreciate it.
Yes, I did want to make a couple of remarks, based on the morning session and all the great thoughts and observations and discussions that we've heard. Some of the elements that caught my attention were the focus on election security, for example. That's very important, especially for this calendar year. And then the discussions about phishing and ransomware attacks being on the rise, especially as they relate to this COVID-19 and pandemic environment. I also found the discussions on the panel related to the proactive defense cyber operations very interesting, and the use of AI and ML techniques, to help us in that regard. And then the last keynote speaker, of course, Nick Anderson, just understanding the broad scope and role of the DOE CSER program and how it protects our country's infrastructure. And I also wanted to mention that it was very interesting as a cyber professional to hear Mr. Driggers mention that the cyber workforce is expected to grow by 65% over the next few years. While it spells job security for cybersecurity professionals like, the attendees on this program, on this session, but it also tells us that we have a responsibility, to kind of pay it forward or to get our young people interested in the space of cybersecurity and to encourage them to take on education or career choices, in that direction. So we have the workforce that we need to fill the open slots coming up. And, as we all know, that cyber threat landscape is growing and it's getting more and more complex by the day. And the challenges are very real. And so to all our attendees, speakers, and guests, stay well and stay vigilant, of course. And with that, over to you, Denny.
Thank you, Dr. Krupa. Okay, just a couple of closing comments I'd like to make if I could. That's first of all and foremost is thank you to our ITPA sponsors, Avaya Government Solutions, BT Federal, CenturyLink, Government, Corning, Crown Castle, Graybar, and Medtel. Without which this could not be possible. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Some closing comments. We have a, mark your calendar, please. We have the second Cybersecurity Transformation Summit on Thursday, July 16th. And it'll be interesting events that will be held throughout the year now in our new virtual world that ITPA is going to step up to. And but we'll be Electrosoft and ITPA will be hosting the Cyber Transformation Summit. One of our lead industry speakers will be Riley Ripka, SES to the Air Force Secretary of Chief of Staff, and other government luminaries in industry and government alike. I also want to mention ITPA's annual charity golf tournament on November 3rd at the Army-Navy Country Club. Please come out. We support our charities. You can find all this information on www.eventsattend.com. And I want to give you some time back to your day. I think we're 8 minutes shy of the 11 o'clock hour. And I want to say thank you very much for all involved for a great event. Thank you very much.